The elf lies on a tree and thinks that the life of an elf is quite long and measured. They eat fruits when they are hungry and they do not hunt, but hone their skills with a bow. The guy takes a bite of the fruit, communicating with spirits and contemplating the truth of the world. Such a slow life. After this, the guy thinks that he is completely fed up with this and wants to eat meat. He was already 30 years old when he realized this, and after 120 years, he grew bored. The protagonist finishes the fruit and turns to the wind spirit. Then a whirlwind appears before him, telling him that he's had enough of the elf life. It's not for him. The protagonist is reborn with memories of his past life. Knowing a world full of cultural products, he understands the lack of incentives in this world. Knowing no other life, high elves love the forest and live there without care. Their lifespan is over 1,000 years. After the death of the body, the soul becomes a spirit, shaking the natural world until the end of time. The main character has been acting this way for over 100 years. But he is already close to the limit. He thinks that he is already tired of all these fruits. He looks in bewilderment at the bird next to him. The guy looks at her and thinks that this is a smart bird. He looks at the object in his hand. To continue living like this for hundreds of years, or until the end of the world, this is simply too much. If this happens, then he wants to see, eat, and experience many more things, and after satisfaction, he will eventually become a spirit or something else. The guy is going to cut off his hair with a blade. After this, the guy touches his head and says with a smile that he just got a haircut and he already feels better. He also thinks that in the deep forest where the elves live, there is a great sea of tall pluha trees. He never knows what is behind the barrier of the elves. He needs to prepare well. The guy gets dressed and realizes that there is no one he wants to say goodbye to before he leaves. But if they are connected by fate, then they will definitely meet again. On the journey, he takes carry-on luggage, a bow and arrow, food packed in a woven ivy bag, and, of course, a stone knife. Half a month later, the main character realizes that the world outside the forest is simply amazing. As soon as he stepped beyond the barrier, he was immediately attacked by a huge and ferocious white forest wolf. And also, when he moved along the river, monsters attacked him, and sometimes fish bit him, right on the leg. The boy jumps over a rock and thinks about what to do with the claws and fangs of a forest wolf. He could make a dagger or a knife out of the large fangs and a necklace out of the small ones, hanging them on a string. First, he should learn some crafting and crafting skills from someone. The protagonist finds himself in front of a beautiful view and realizes that the horizon stretches in all directions. He's amazed by the beauty. The road leads to a city that is located behind a wall. The main character runs along it and thinks that this world is endless. After he found himself at the entrance to the city, the guard asked him whether this was his first time in the city of people. Entrance to the city was paid, 20 copper coins with an identity document, or 1 silver coin without a document. In general, he needs money to get through. He sees the guy's face and asks if he knows what money is. He knows what money is and understands what it means. The guard asks the elf if he has any acquaintances in the city. Then he can call them to pay, and then he will return it to them. The main character thinks that he doesn't want to do this, but he can ask to buy the fangs of a forest wolf. Some girl approaches him. Behind him, there are 2 girls and 1 guy. The one in the middle is an elf. She apologizes and asks him if she can have a minute. The protagonist looks at her in bewilderment, after which she grabs his hand and drags him along with her, turns around and asks him if he is by any chance a high elf. The protagonist thinks that for ordinary elves, the high elves seem to be clothed in light. This cannot be hidden due to the immortality of the soul. He thinks he won't be able to hide it and nods silently. She asks if he wouldn't mind telling her what brought someone like him to this human city. The main character admits that he was simply bored in the forest, and he decided to see the world. The girl looks at him suspiciously. She can call him Ace. That's what they call him in the deep forests. She thinks that he is strange, and he understands this. The guy notices that her facial expression is constantly changing. Maybe she has lived in the outside world for too long. Elves also change when they go outside. The girl says that it would be impolite to make such an offer to a high elf, but she has connections, so she will gladly help him. The main character thanks her for her help. That's all he needs. She is surprised by this. After this, she sits down on her knees and holds his hand. He thinks that it was he who should have shaken her hand and not she his. The protagonist appreciates her help, but when they enter the city, they immediately disperse. The girl says that the 6-star team White Lake guarantees Eisa's identity, and they will also pay for entry. The guy tells Ace that 6 stars is the rank of an adventurer. 1 star is for beginners. The highest rank is 7 stars. There are only a few groups in the country. They have 6 stars and they are the highest ranked in Wistakort. Then the protagonist claps his hands, and the guard congratulates the protagonist that he can enter the city whenever he wants. If he creates problems in the city, the guarantor will be held responsible. The protagonist reads the rules. No stealing, no taking out weapons on the street. If a person without citizenship stays in the city for a long time, he pays a residence tax. Eisa understands that he must be careful with these rules. They tell him that if he has read it and agrees with it, then he should write his name here. The guard sees his name and says his own. Rodner from Corral, and if he has any problems, then he should contact him. Then the gates are opened for them and they are welcome to the city of Wistakort. The protagonist looks at the city from within in amazement. The girl behind him asks him if he has any plans for what to do next. If he has no plans, she recommends he register as an adventurer to get an ID. Eisa thinks there's something more important, something he's been wanting to do. Namely, to process the materials of the forest wolf. He beamed and said that he wanted to go to the forge. Where is the best place here? The girl admits that the best forge in the city is the dwarf's shop, but she would like to know if he would sell something to them, the elves. The guy thinks that the dwarves in elven mythology say that they stole a piece of fire from all of nature and locked it in a furnace. But if we discard the mythology, then elves and dwarves do not get along with each other. Arena is right that they may not sell them anything. The main character asks why not. He would like to see the gnomes, if they don't mind. But if she doesn't like it, then let him just tell her where the shop is. She asks him if he hates gnomes, and he says he has never even met them. Elves hate metal products and dwarves because the trees of the forest are afraid of the metal products made by dwarves. He understands. To be afraid of an axe. But to be afraid of dishes, they just hate gnomes. To go now and disturb is bad. He would like to go to the hotel, but there is no money. He offers the girl to buy something and she is surprised. He tells her that people make an elixir of youth out of this and it might come in handy. The girl is shocked that he gives her the apua fruit. The main character understands that the elves love the apua fruits very much. Thanks to Arena, he entered the city. He asks her to take the fruit as a sign of gratitude because she helped him a lot. The girl angrily tells him not to show these fruits to others so easily. Tomorrow, first thing, she will explain about money and human life. They will go to the forge only when they finish with this. The main character understands that tomorrow he will learn a lot from Irina. The main character stands on the street in front of the forge building. Then he goes inside and loudly greets someone. However, there is no one inside, and the guy thinks that maybe he is busy. He looks at the goods. He notices one beautiful knife on his back. A dwarf comes out of another room and apologizes to the elf for keeping him waiting. A man tells a guy that he has good tastes, but there are much better ones. Then he notices something about the guy. The gnome shouts that he is an elf, but what is he doing in his store? He doesn't sell anything to elves. The main character, with a smile, wishes him a good day and calls him as disrespectfully as he does. The guy tells him it's a very fine kukri, but he's not here to buy anything. He's already chosen the material for his knife, so here's a souvenir of their meeting. He hands him something and says it's a polite way to apologize. Suddenly, the man angrily grabs the guy and asks who he called that. Elves only know how to choose alcohol. Then he lets him go and asks him if he didn't come for shopping. Then why did he come? If it was for some stupid reason, then he will definitely kill him. The main character says that he killed a wolf in the forest. He takes out and puts its fang. He would like to make a knife out of this fang. Since he killed it, he shouldn't let it go to waste. The dwarf tells the guy that he was mistaken. This is the fang of a much larger beast, a grand wolf. This is not a job for an amateur. A couple of tricks won't do, experience is needed. Eisa reports that this is why he came, to learn from the best dwarf in the city. He could not take either skin or meat, because he did not have a knife at hand, only a fang and claws. The dwarf sighs and says that he can process it for him, and if he is so strong, he can earn money as an adventurer. Ace is surprised. He realizes the dwarf could probably forge a weapon for him. Eisa admits he doesn't want to be an adventurer just yet. He needs not only a knife, but also other items made from fangs and claws. He'd like to become a blacksmith for 10 or 20 years. The dwarf is shocked to realize that he is not a fool, but a very strange elf. But better strange than arrogant. He says that he will teach the boy blacksmithing. It will be a shame if the Grand Wolf's fang disappears just like that, no matter what his path is, even if they do not understand it. But it will always cross someone else's path. Then the protagonist extends his hand to the elf and they shake it. He realized that Ace was not going to give up and shook his hand. The girl says that she understood how it happened, but why Ace should work in the dwarf's shop. The guy says that if he works for the dwarf, he will pay him. Irina pays for the hotel, and a very luxurious one at that. Stew with minced meat, bread that fills your mouth with the aroma of wheat, steak with a rich taste. He can't do it now. But one day, he wants to become independent and give her back all the money. The girl says that this is not the issue, but if the smell of iron gets on his body, the trees will be frightened, and the spirits do not like this. What will happen to him if the spirits leave him? He says that she is wrong here. The spirits will not hate him if he smells like metal. They don't like being chopped down with an axe, but the trees aren't that weak. So perhaps there was an incident where the spirits were angered by the pollution caused by mineral poisoning. When the elves learned of this, they decided the spirits hated metal and spread the word. If Ace placed a potted plant in the forge, the boy would be friendly with it. He asked the dwarf if he could bring the plant. The dwarf sighed, and the boy understood that this was consent. Eisa would be happy to tell the girl about perfume, but while she's here, he'd like her to buy something he recommends, this kukri. The girl says it's truly a good thing after all. It was made by a dwarf. He asks if Eisa will be angry when he sells it to her. The guy says that he would be angry if she took care of him carelessly, but if she uses him carefully, then why not? The girl says that he sees what she does not see, or rather, sees what she did not even try. She asks him to sell her this knife. She says that she will take care of it. This in no way can eliminate the enmity between the elves and the dwarves, a good quality weapon for an experienced adventurer. The protagonist thinks that this should be enough for them to be happy. It's been a year since he's been living in this city. Irina's squad came here to completely update their equipment. More customers mean more staff in the store. He learned to forge nails. There was a shortage of metal products back then, making life difficult. He passed on a request from the villagers to the teacher asking for at least nails. The gnome said his arrival had increased his clientele, and he should try making it himself, and he'd teach him. Making nails is fun, he has more work and a higher salary, but Irina still pays most of his expenses. According to the value of money she taught him, his accommodations cost around 5,000 yen per night. Irina insisted on this, and he complained about it to Rodner. Rodner said that she had vouched for him, so she could not leave him alone in any way. If he wanted to leave the hotel, then Rodner would find a safe place for him, and that would calm her down a little. The main character thinks about Irene, the dwarf, and Rodner. He is very happy that they are in his life. Irina's squad had now left on a long-term assignment. When she returned, he would have a serious talk with her about this matter. Suddenly, a girl enters the shop, and the protagonist wishes her a pleasant return. Suddenly, Martin, horrified, informs him that she needs his power to stop the mad spirit. She asks him to come with her. They are alone, and the girl says that the story is long and complicated. This is a rather unpleasant matter. Their squad accepted an order. The request came from the city of Galaret, located more than 2 weeks' journey from here. The request came to them, or rather to Irina, the spirit seer. The request is to remove the curse of the crazy water spirit that polluted the river's water. According to Irina, one of the residents angered the water spirit. It is not difficult to understand that people became ill from drinking the water. At the same time, a massive die-off of fish was observed in the river, while the surrounding vegetation did not weaken. The guy understands that it is impossible for a water spirit to pollute the water in which it lives. This is not a curse, it is a problem of pollution. He heard that Galaret is a new city where a mine was found 10 years ago. In other words, the damage from the pollution caused by the ore poison was blamed on the anger of the spirit. He asks the girl what kind of person Lord Galaret is. The girl says that he is from a new noble family, is enthusiastically developing the mine entrusted to him by the king, has realized the cause and shifted the blame, or he does not even understand the environmental problem. What should he do? Then, Irina went to the place. She tried her best to calm the spirit that wanted to destroy the city, and Kreia stayed as a guard, just in case. And she hurried back for help. The protagonist understands that despite the difficult situation, she is confidently developing as a visionary. In this situation, this can be considered a kind of blessing. After all, Irina could easily complete the task if she simply did what they wanted from her. If the aquatic environment is destroyed, the spirit will not be able to interfere in this world. But she correctly understood the problem and is working on its solution. She sees a friend in the spirit. The guy is always willing to cooperate, but they'll need another assistant. Dwarves have been working with metal since ancient times, so they know a lot about the harmful effects. he decides to turn to his dwarf teacher for help. He understands what they are talking about. Of course, if the blacksmith's union conducts an investigation, the results will reach the king. He agrees to conduct an investigation. Eisa simply asks to introduce them to someone from the union, because without him, the store will be closed for a long time. But if an ordinary blacksmith investigates, then the information may not reach the king. But if it is a blacksmith, then the king will have to act. The dwarves have a very strong influence in the kingdom. Many of them are in alliances in this country. No dwarf except himself will listen to the elf, the boy, and the girl exchange glances. They suddenly laugh, and the gnome asks what's so funny. Everything happened quickly after that. It's not a matter of indifference to the person working here. If the mine in Galaret is closed, metal prices will rise, even if another one is discovered, and the opposition has spoken out against its development. This is also a big problem for them. They ask them to be careful. First, the dwarf will go to the capital and try to establish the work of the union, the city of Galaret. The Lord is confident that the dwarf will take care of this. The protagonist is, after all, a high elf living in the human world. He will do what only an elf can do. The main character and the girl find Cryas in the forest, and he notices them. He is very exhausted. The guy understands that Cryas seemed to be holding his position here. Further on, the forest is shrouded in impenetrable fog. If any of the people had gone down there, the fog would have started to condense into water in their tracheas, effectively drowning them. Martin's round-trip trip lasted almost a month, and staying here the entire time was torture. He says they did a good job. When Arena returns, they'll go somewhere safer. The protagonist tells the girl who is talking to the creature that she has come so far in such a short time. He is proud to call her his acquaintance. The girl says that this is grateful Ace. She asks him to come back, but he asks to give it to her. She pays for her living expenses. He should at least work for this money. After all, her teammates are waiting for her. The girl is leaving. A high elf becomes an immortal spirit after death, so they are roughly equal. An elf like Arena can only ask the spirit for help, but cannot reprimand it. It's time for Ace to step in. He asks the spirit what's making her so angry. Her story went like this. Long ago, people lived here who deeply revered nature, and this reverence extended to the spirit of the spring, even deifying it. One day, this land was invaded, and the survivors integrated into the new culture but did not betray their faith. They were categorically against the mining project, so they were expelled, but the spirit cannot interfere unless specifically asked. But that tribe did not want to involve the spirit in this dispute. For herself, for her loved ones, for the people around her, for the earth itself, she couldn't allow the pollution to continue. But then this child appeared before her, and she decided for herself. For the sake of this girl and the world she lived in, the evil must be completely washed away. Eisa understands that things are bad. She's already made her decision, as has he. He understands her feelings. He will turn the tide of events in his favor, like a current of water. He understands her anger very well, but if she carries out her plan, the weak and righteous people will also be swept away. She must not direct her anger at them. Workers who have only the purest intentions. They do not know the harm they cause. Innocent babies who do not yet know good and evil. Mothers who carefully feed their babies, especially the children here, and the children of her loved ones, are almost indistinguishable. If they were thoughtlessly washed away, she would no longer be the spirit they revered. As for the pollution, his friend is already working on eliminating it, so there is no need to direct your anger at those who do not deserve it. Ultimately, the city was saved thanks to the dwarf. The Blacksmiths Guild is currently working to resolve the problems at the mine. Any work at this deposit is now possible only after their approval. The true cause of the incident became public knowledge, and the White Lakes completed their mission. The Lord was held accountable for the problems with the mine and relieved of his post, and the exile of the native population was annulled. He hopes that they will return and live without fear. Sometime later, the former lord died in his bath, and the king who appointed him drowned 3 days later. The deposed lord harbored a grudge against the king, and rumors circulated that the lord gave his life to place a curse on him. But the truth remains hidden somewhere in the dark depths. 3 years after Ace began to learn blacksmithing, when he was able to start working on weapons and armor, he happened to meet a young man. One guy wanted to buy a baton. Is there any armor that would go well with it? This is the mace Ace made. If he can use it with one hand, then a shield would be a good choice. Leather boots will help keep him steady. The guy thinks that he's a good guy. He'll make a great adventurer. If things go well, he'll make money and come back for even better equipment. If this happens, then he can choose his job again. He would like it to be so. The boy's name was Astor. He looks forward to meeting him again. The main character gradually learns blacksmithing. He also learns to shoot a bow. The girl cuts Ace's hair when his hair grows out. It's been 10 years since the boy started learning blacksmithing, and he's still very surprised by something. He asks his gnome teacher if he will get married, and he says that yes, he has a fiancée and that he is being called to take over the family business. The elf asks how old the dwarf is, and the dwarf is surprised that he's only asking now. He's 90 years old. 90 years for a dwarf is about the same as 25-30 years for a human. Eisa reflects on how young he is, and he becomes curious. The man suddenly mentions that he too will have to think about his future someday, and the protagonist understands that this will take some time, no matter what. Over the past decade, the master has taken on many apprentices. Many of them are skilled enough to open their own businesses, so even if the master dwarf leaves, his apprentices will make up for the loss to the blacksmithing world. The seeds he'd spent so long nurturing had grown into wondrous trees. Apparently, they should only begin apprenticing with the dwarf after he became an experienced blacksmith. Eisa thought it was reckless, a complete novice apprenticing with a dwarf. He was a bit arrogant. He looks at the dwarf and thinks about how we took him as an apprentice after all, and thinks about their true connection. Eisa asks who his fiancée is. The dwarf says it's safe to ask while holding a cleaver. The number of blacksmiths isn't the only thing that's changed in the last 10 years, for example. Beloyo Zero rose to the very top, becoming a 7-star team, and 3 years ago they disbanded. The warrior Creus and the priestess Martin eventually married, retiring at the peak of their careers and hoping to train the next generation of adventurers. He would say it was the right decision. Arena left the city in search of new comrades. She said that the adventures were just beginning. She was not finished yet. She said goodbye to Eisa with a smile and heaped so many warnings on him that he felt as if she were his mother. She said there were many things and people to remember. The very first person he met in the city, Rodner, rose through the ranks to eventually become a captain in the guard, and even now they often meet at the local cafeteria for drinks. And that boy Astor has become an excellent warrior. He tells Ace that he's finally reached 5 stars. He has every chance of reaching the White Lake level as he's an excellent adventurer. Ace congratulated him. So much has happened in the last 10 years, the life he lived before this. For 150 years, cannot be compared. He is absolutely sure of that. The dwarf asks the boy what he will do when he returns to the dwarf kingdom. Eisa thinks that he will learn how to wield a sword and use magic. He looks for places in the capital where they can teach this. He has enough money. The dwarf asks if his spiritual things are magic. He is as incomprehensible as usual and offers to give me a ride because he can do whatever he wants. The dwarf addresses Ace by name, which surprises him. The dwarf says that he is definitely his best student and he will always be his friend. Eisa laughs and tells him that it is not like him. A high elf like him would hardly ever be able to visit the kingdom of the dwarves. So Oswald is his teacher and friend, whom he will never forget. The gnome shakes his hand and asks which of them is not acting like himself now. He would say that his strong point is getting involved in all the adventures he wants. Suddenly he hits him and asks if it is true. The dwarf says that in that case, let him give him 50 years and come to the kingdom of the dwarves. He is the best blacksmith in his country, so he will definitely be crowned when he sits on the throne. He will make it so that the elves can come to them whenever they want, and when he visits them, he will proudly raise his head and introduce himself as his apprentice. For dwarves, blacksmithing is everything. With this skill, they can achieve any heights, even become king. Then, he can't afford to relax. He will continue to improve, even if it's just one step. The teacher left the forge to one of the students. He borrowed it for a short time to make a knife. The teacher gave him an official license. He had to snatch it from the hands of the guild blacksmiths. So Aisa's luggage was replenished with a license and a knife made from a wolf's fang. It would take about 10 days to get to the capital by carriage, and longer if you walk. But since he had the chance, he would still go and remember the past 10 years. In Vorfil, the capital of the kingdom of Ludria, an elf is asked if he is a blacksmith living in human cities and if he would study swords and sorcery here. Ace is called eccentric. The royal capital of Vorfil is located right in the middle of the kingdom of Ludria. That's obvious, but it's livelier and nicer than Wistakort, and there are also many schools training swordsmen here. There are 3 main schools of fencing, collectively known as the 3 disciplines. The Royal Ludrian style is a balanced sword and shield style. The two-handed Lodran style is a swordsman style, and the Grand style is a style focused on absolute defense. Eisa remembers hearing about another style but thinks it just disappeared due to lack of students. He thinks he would have chosen maybe law drawn. Then he notices the street performers. He sees a girl in a dress cutting an apple in half with one blow of a sword. The main character is shocked and thinks that this is impossible. He can't say that this blade is dull, but how can he make such a clean cut? He saw it with his own eyes and cannot doubt the beauty of her wave. The girl is surprised that he hands her one silver coin. She thanks him, and Eisa confesses that her technique has stolen his heart, asking to be taken as an apprentice. He will pay for her training. He will do any job. He begs her. He doesn't actually know the name of the style she practices, but he wants to master it. The girl says that she understands everything and will take him to her. Dojo, she is sure that he will change his mind when he sees everything with his own eyes. She says that one of the 4 disciplines was taught here. It was the Yosogi Dojo. The guy is shocked that it is in ruins. But the head of the school was subjected to Lodrin. They used fake swords, but he was hit so hard that he died. The other students wanted revenge. But there was a lot of dispute over who would become the head. Their supposed revenge was suppressed. The dojo was never recovered. Yosogi once was. Yosogi is now only important for show, not for combat. Her style is all that remains of her father's teachings, which she developed in her own way, under his supervision. However, learning their style could attract unwanted attention from Lodran's school, so let him go his own way. The guy says everything is fine. The style she demonstrated is what he wants to learn. He doesn't know how strong Lodran's students are, but he's not afraid, however. Before they start, he'll ask her to let him work on her sword for a week. In this state, he won't be able to keep up with her style. He specializes in archery and spirit summoning and is also a licensed advanced ranked blacksmith. He will be her first reincarnated student at the Yosoge school. If that's okay with her, a woman behind them asks if they have a guest. The woman says no. He's officially working there today and will be staying in the guest room. Both the woman and the man are surprised. Things quickly became very tense. Kaina's mother suffers from a breast condition, so he went into the forest and collected medicinal herbs for her. Kaina performs on the street to pay for his mother's medication, deciding to save her time and money. He also began visiting a blacksmith's guild in his free time, where they were surprised. He worked on Kaina's sword as if it were his own, so he began accepting orders there. He should make some connections here while he's here. It might come in handy in the future. He talked to people on the way back and spread the word that Elf had joined Yosogi. It would attract those who were opposed to the idea of its revival. If something happens to either of those two, it will disrupt his training. He does what he wants. Protects them. Now he has no time to study witchcraft. Cryas responded to the letter. He wants the students of Lodran to ignore them, so he wants the former 7-star to intimidate them. He asked to leave the showdown with the school to him, and if something happens, to write to him before destroying the buildings. He thinks the problems with school started when he was on an adventure, but he's still a student at Lodran. He imagines how Kaina and her mother will react when Cryas comes here. They are very fragile and difficult to control, and he knows he can be a bit bossy. He understands why elves choose to be hermits. However, he wants to communicate with people. After all, he has never seen anything cuter than this smile. After that, his training finally began. It was very simple. It all came down to practicing swings, and all he did was copy Kaina. She has never taught anyone before, so this is her only normal option. It is not something that should be taught to beginners. It is just like blacksmithing. The boy collapses when he's tired, eats, and then washes himself with water from the well. He makes adjustments here and there until he's finished, step by step, with nothing but time. Cryas came to them. He stopped at Lodran's school before coming to the dojo. Listened to Kaina. Since he was his acquaintance, he stood behind him. To be honest, he's a really cool adventurer. He says his comrades and he are sorry for causing them trouble. They seem to see him as a noble warrior, and he ended up staying the night in the guest room. The girl approaches Cryas and offers him to fight just one round. The guy agrees. However, Kaina was absolutely helpless against him. She thinks that she lost. The guy says that her level of fencing is low, the real world, practical experience. This is something he has a lot of. This is not what everyone needs. The protagonist thinks that there is nothing special about this. If Kaina's swordsmanship is imperfect, then his will be the same. Maybe 1 or 2 years, he advises her to become an adventurer during this time. The strongest person he knows will be with her all this time. The girl tells the elf that he did a favor for her sword, her mother, and Cryas. But if he forgives her, she will ask him to do one more favor. She plans to become an adventurer and asks him to look after her mother. Everyone's path is different. He has two conditions. He wants to make her armor before he leaves. Secondly, she has to use his house in Wistakort as a headquarters. She's surprised he has a house. She's very naive. If she lives in his house, then her acquaintances will look after her. Neighbors, a fencing instructor, a church priestess. She will still be able to train and harden herself. She holds the guy's hands and thanks him, asking him to wait a little. She promises to become a swordswoman worthy of being his master. 3 years after her departure, he completely renovated the dojo and trained swings alone. He swore to protect her mother, so he never abandoned her. He had a forge built nearby. His blacksmithing skills improved, and he even asked permission to participate in the competition to present his work to the king. Last year he took 3rd place, and this year he's 2nd. The only people who beat him were the dwarves, which is why he's harassed by nobles and hooligans. They left him alone when he showed signs of stubbornness, despite orders for swords, invitations to their domains, and attendance at banquets. Every 3 months, letters arrived from Kaina, with stories of how she ate meat with her hands, or how an adventurer confessed his love. They were curious about what was in this letter. Maybe she'd promoted her rank again. In the first year, she got 4 stars. In the second, already 5. She is advancing very quickly. He is worried that she has done too much in such a short period of time. But he knows that Cryas is watching her. Now her skills are developing quickly due to experience. Suddenly, her mother is surprised by something. It turns out she received 6 stars. Eisa is very happy. And very soon she will return home. They will see her after only 3 years. His master is returning. The main character is sitting by the stove and someone shouts to him that dinner is ready. A tired guy with a tool in his hands hears it. Since they received that letter, she's been cooking huge amounts of food every day. She's overjoyed that her daughter will finally be coming home. Eisa just can't let it go to waste, so he eats every last drop, desperately hoping that Kaina will come home soon, he and his stomach. Then the main character notices a light-colored butterfly that flew into the house through the door. He suddenly gets up and runs out. The protagonist stands on the street and sees the silhouette of a girl in the passageway who then grabs her sword. Suddenly, she is above him, swinging her sword. Ace is ready to fight back. He can only say one thing with certainty. From Kaina's blow, the boy's sword breaks and he realizes that these 3 years have not been wasted. In these 3 short years, she has blossomed into a beautiful, breathtaking flower. He wishes her a pleasant return and calls her master. He also tells Irina that they haven't seen each other for a long time and asks her if she needs his help. She says that it is true. Some time has passed. Today she must ask him for help. Cryas introduced her to Kaina so that she could bring her to him. The girl's story went like this. A handful of Ludrian nobles caught and captured elves, presumably for bragging rights. Eisa asks if a human can really catch an elf so easily. The only elves he knows are the unfortunate ones who work as adventurers, or perhaps those who live deep in the forest. Common elves living outside the great sea of trees are not accustomed to fighting due to their nature. The ability to communicate with spirits is one thing, but doing so in combat is quite another, so it is unlikely that humans will be able to capture the elves unless through military force. In short, these nobles raided the elven settlements in their territory with their personal friends. The elven settlements are very well hidden. Most people do not even notice them. Captured elves are blinded and regularly tortured so they cannot create a connection with the spirits. And without this connection, they can only rely on humans to fill their emptiness and are treated like animals. Elves are not such a docile people, but they are quite attractive. Ace personally doesn't understand why everyone wants a servant, but he can understand why elves are so valued. The girl says that some of those responsible are among the most important nobles in the country, with the entire eastern region under their control. The royal government is surely aware of this, as they haven't intervened anyway. She's certain they view the punishment of key figures in the country as a matter of no small importance. Secretly owning elven servants is becoming a popular status symbol among the nobility. In fact, they may even make it legal. Simply secretly rescuing the captured elves will not give them anything. The nobles who started this must be exposed and punished. The kingdom must apologize for everything. So it is not exactly she who needs his power. Humans can forget the pain they've endured as a generation passes, so to prevent the elves from experiencing the same, the pain must be carved out within the kingdom itself. Elven anger must be expressed as clearly as possible, so he will ensure the necessary mountains are moved. She will save the elves while he is busy. If all goes well, She will be able to convince everyone in the country to leave the forest and move elsewhere. Elves live in forests where the influence of nature is very strong. If they leave, the territory will be overrun by out-of-control monsters, which will eventually overrun the forest and burst forth. This is why the elves refuse to part with the forest they love so dearly. Eisa might be able to convince them to move if things have become that dire. He tells the girl that he understands everything, asks her to raise her head, says that if it comes to this, he will no longer be able to live in this country. But this will also affect all the elves, including her. Kana is surprised, asks him to wait and grabs his hand. She tells him that she still hasn't taught him anything. He became her disciple, cured her mother's illness, and she still has to thank him for these 3 years. She tearfully tells him that she has done nothing for him. She cries and Eisa calmly addresses her. He reports that her early blow still burns in his eyes like a bright day. She has given him another guideline so that he can continue to follow her example. Let her not say she couldn't teach him anything. She did far more for him than he did for her. And if that's not enough, then let her continue on her path, passing it on to her students or her child, if she has one. Then, even if it might take decades, even if she was no longer with them, he would still learn from the one who had inherited her blade. Irina was still sitting with her head down. She didn't just apologize to him, she also apologized to Kana. She didn't tell her about her intentions. Kana states that she vows to elevate her sword even further and pass it on to her successor. But she is still its master, so let it return to her while she still lives. The protagonist thinks that Kana's blade is burning in his eyes, and her words are sealed in his heart. He is a rather happy person. He headed to the heart of eastern Ludoria, deep within a fertile forest on the Marquis's lands. It was once home to an elven settlement, which had been destroyed by the Marquis's personal army. The preparations ultimately took 6 months. He felt sorry for all the elves who had to endure this. They all needed to be saved. Organizing the elven immigration, searching for all the elves, they could not do anything rash until everything was prepared in advance. He thought again and again about how he could attack the territory of the nobility. He considered asking the water spirit for help, but that wouldn't work. He also considered asking the fire and wind spirits, but a flaming tornado would take too many lives, leading to conflict between humans and elves. He needs the spectacle to be as grandiose and at the same time less flawed as possible. He turns to the great spirits living on Earth and asks them to help him. He clearly imagines focusing on the territory of the nobility in the East, not a strong vertical shaking, a slight horizontal vibration, the rumble of the Earth. From his past experience, these tremors won't cause serious damage. But for people who have never experienced anything like this, it will be terrifying. It will affect the father, the honest, the righteous, and the weak. Perhaps the horror will turn to rage. Rage at the nobles who are to blame for this, at the country that allowed this to happen. But no matter what, he is the one who did it. Using the jolt as a signal, the elves will go rescue their captured comrades, and then they will begin a mass exodus from the forests, numbering around 8,000. Soon the forest will be overrun with monsters, and the country will likely apologize. Only when this apology goes down in history will they be confident that such a tragedy will not happen again. Irina will be the key negotiator, as she's a high-ranking adventurer, and Ludria will be wary of her. But there's another problem. If any of the rescued have children, the tragedy will continue. Half-elves are less able to communicate with spirits due to their mixed blood, and their lifespans and growth rates also vary. They are hated for the disasters they bring and are returned to Earth as soon as they are born. Ace couldn't stay in this country any longer. It had completely slipped his mind. But he never bothered to learn magic here. He wonders where he'll go. The cold glow of his sword helps calm his thoughts. This is what he must show during his time in Ludria. The choice he made has its benefits and its price. The main character stands in front of a pond in surprise and shouts joyfully that this is the sea. To the south of the kingdom of Ludria is Pavolgia, and further south, where he reached, the Republic of the Astrika, located on the very coast. It is not a very large country, but it is very successful in maritime affairs and is governed by an elected parliament made up of nobles. Frequent skirmishes occur along the border with Pavlogia. Pavlogia is reluctant to gain access to the sea. Meanwhile, Ludria sends food to support Pavlogia, making it yet another country at odds with Valastrica. The guy thinks about how Ludria is said to be much richer than Pavlogia. The thought that someone could struggle to get something as basic as drinking water never occurred to him in Ludria. The boy made sure to pray for the good luck of this young girl who shared her water with him and for the people of her village. And now that he has overcome all these difficulties to get here, so much has happened to him in Ludria, he just wants to go somewhere where he can live peacefully and see. He also happily announces that he wants to eat seafood and asks the guy with glasses in front of him if he knows any good restaurants. The guy next to him says that he is definitely not a spy. The guy offers to continue, apologizes to the elf. They had so many problems with the northerners, so they need to check everyone who arrives. They welcome him to Saracha. He'll be able to find any food he wants here. He's written to him about several establishments. Eisa is thinking about finding a sailor and buying some fresh fish. It must be around here somewhere. The main character enters the establishment and asks if he can sit down there. The girl wishes him welcome. She's suddenly surprised that an elf has visited their tavern, a rarity, and asks him what he wants to eat. He'd like the finest raw and grilled fish, 6 large fried clams, and any drink to go with it. The girl tells him that the order is big, but she wouldn't say that he's such a glutton. Someone touches her and she says that if he needs something, he should ask with his tongue. The main character understands that she's not one of the timid ones. She apologizes for the wait and will now bring the fish, salad with pink fish and truffle oil, 6 fried clams. He begins to eat. He continues eating and drinking. He really likes it. Then he looks at the waitress. Suddenly, someone asks someone why he is here and how many times does he have to repeat himself. The dark-haired man punches the guy, causing him to knock the waitress off her feet. The protagonist manages to react and catch the girl, but the plate with the fish falls and breaks on the floor. The man proudly says that this is the only language these boars understand, and the protagonist angrily informs him that he killed the fish. Eisa yells at him to apologize to her for this and punches him in the face. After some time, the man looks angrily at the two. The protagonist asks to accept their apologies. The girl says that Elf tried to protect her, but the man asks Karina to be quieter. The man says that it was he who ruined Elf's day, so it is not his fault. Grant tells Driz that it is of course his fault. How many more problems he will cause. He has to restrain himself so as not to force him into normal behavior. Driz says it was Lorette who started it all, saying it wasn't food, but trash. The protagonist asks if that's true that such good food is worth fighting over. He apologizes. He shouldn't have gotten angry. The man smiles. Now they speak the same language. He deserves a blow for ruining the dinner. He offers to catch the guy a whole fish. Grant is certainly glad they made up, but maybe they'll look back. If they pay for the broken chairs and tables, he'll forgive them. Well, if Driz is going to catch fish, he will let him cook it. Eisa met 3 people at once. The waitress Karina, the fisherman Driz, and the owner Grant. Something bothers the protagonist at night. The man who was beaten by Driz, he was so rude that he dared to insult the food of the owner in the tavern. But it is strange that he gave up so quickly. Driz said that he works in a trading company. Ace should be more careful if this continues, then the wounds can lower the skills. It will be unfair to Aswald and Kaya. The guy thinks that the dwarf would definitely say that he doesn't train enough. He needs to get up early and he goes to bed. The guy thinks that he wanted Driz to catch something for him too. He's late. The main character is suddenly told to leave here, because he has nothing to do here. Eisa says that everything is not so bad. He wanted to take advantage of his offer from yesterday. But they tell him that it is none of his business, and suddenly water flies into the air. The main character tells him not to touch him. He wants to talk to Driz. He assures that it will be worse for him if he touches them. The local sea spirits are more warlike than the others. One of the guys shouts that it was all their fault. How could they possibly think of turning against him? Yesterday he deliberately provoked Driz to give him a pretext. He orders them to be captured. The protagonist thinks discontentedly that he is too hungry for this. Suddenly a fight starts between them and the protagonist easily defeats them. The guy looks at Eisa in shock and tells him that he is strong. Why did he let himself get beaten yesterday? He could have just knocked him down if he had done that. The main character says that he doesn't need spirits in a one-on-one fight, but he would force his friends to fight alone. That would be too much. He thinks about catching something else for him. He needs to go right now. Does he have any wishes? The god of the seas is fickle, but he will do everything that depends on him. The protagonist eats it and says that it has a wonderful texture, and that he is ready to die for this drink. He thinks that he can make many things from octopus if he experiments. After asking around at the inn and the market, he learned about everything that was going on here. In this city, merchants came and went on huge ships, while fishermen used small boats, which caused them to have serious disputes over the use of the pier. Castelli family, who have been involved in the fishing business for many years, and fishermen and traders, are supported by various members of noble families. The Tri-Train family controls many trading companies, including the Loretta Company. The Tri-Train family is trying to increase the number of their trading outlets here, and new people began to arrive in the city buying things and fish. The more sold, the more money the fishermen had. But even these relationships with merchant ships have deep roots. The port needs to be made deeper. They need a wider harbor to accommodate the maximum number of fishing boats. They are small. They can sail right up to the beach. Their sails are so high, the port needs to be even bigger. He doesn't know if this is a common problem for coastal towns, but it seems to be the main conflict in this town. The guy reports bringing in another octopus. Driz is something of a leader among the young fishermen, so they wanted to make a show of mockery of him. Larrett seemed to want to humiliate the fishermen in this way. The problem is that even if the abuse is somewhat horrifying, he can't say anyone is completely and unreservedly evil. But fishermen and merchants are closely connected, and yet there's no solution to this problem. Larrett sent her a letter of apology and that they would meet tomorrow. This is his 4th day in the city. He heard that he is quite a slippery person. He will do everything for his own benefit, so he ignored him. The main character thought he wanted to apologize to him, but the guys were behind him. Ace turned to the spirits of the earth, and the sand attacked them. Eisa, in horror, he tells the spirits of the earth that there is one more request. Suddenly, they all fall through the ground. Ace grabbed 10 people, and they needed help to get out. In reality, they didn't need an entire army. And when the soldiers realized all this, they discovered that Lareth had been mocking the fishermen. But besides that, they were also engaged in fraud. In short, Lareth will have to answer for his crimes. The trading company tried to kill the traveler but lost, so he became a serious problem for the Tri-Train family. Although not all the city's problems have been solved, it's still a problem. The Tri-Train and Pastelli families both allow their people to quarrel, a tug of war between their interests, a way to relieve pressure before the situation boils over. Asa continued to enjoy the food and drink at Grant's Tavern until, a month later, he had completely gorged himself on seafood. On his last night there, he was brought some dried, salted decapod. Karina says that he seems to like it. They have more and more people ordering it. They have never had this many people. Asa says that they need to hire new staff. Grant will continue to add new dishes to the menu, so let's expect even more people. He asks her if she is always so busy, he will be leaving soon. This will definitely reduce her workload. Minnie constantly felt someone's gaze on him, even when they dealt with Lorette. The gaze did not go away. In fact, it was Karina who was watching him. It seemed as if she had a network of spies throughout the city. She asks him to eat. If he finishes eating, then she will have less work. His first impression of her was correct. They will miss him. The guy will visit them sometimes. Then they clap their hands. As long as this city remains the same, constantly evolving but unchanged, he hopes she misses him. Initially, the entire region was called the Azad Empire, thus it evolved into a region of countries and city-states. And yet, how do all these small countries avoid being absorbed by the larger powers, the Azid Alliance? They come together to fight against the infiltration of outsiders into them. And also besides the Alliance, they have additional conditions. One was created as a place for the study of magic and for the training of powerful mages capable of single-handedly changing the course of the war. It is completely independent, so no city can capture it. One of his goals is to learn magic. He will have a much better chance of finding an excellent teacher in Odin. And even if he doesn't meet anyone there, a simple trip around the country will help satisfy his curiosity. A man in glasses and a hat approaches Eisa and asks if he needs a ride. But Eisa says no, everything's fine. He prefers to walk when traveling. Carriages also make him seasick. He sent Arena a letter from Sarot in which he said that he was heading to Odin. If he was near Odin, then she would somehow contact him. He wonders if he'll get seasick on a boat. If he could travel by ship, it could add a lot of variety to his travels. If he ever returns to Sorrow, he will ask Driz to let him roll back. This is the city of Jampamon. A stone Titanic drifting in a golden sea is just a quote from a poet who lives here. But even just knowing this phrase makes him feel stronger in spirit. This time, he will use the blacksmith's license to enter. He doesn't plan to stay long, but he'd like to do some work at the forge. It's been a while since he last did that. Revealing his name and being recognized in the area will help reduce the level of security surveillance. The girl asks him whether he came for dinner or whether he needs a room. In general, he needs a room, but he wouldn't refuse dinner either. Can he take both? The girl agrees. She shouts to her mother that they have an overnight guest. One room costs 50 copper coins, dinner is 12 copper coins, breakfast is 8 coins. The main character takes off his hat. The girl is surprised and calls him by name. His room is right here. She asks him to leave his suitcase and come down for dinner. The bathroom and laundry room will also cost 5 coins each. The main character goes up the stairs behind it. Then she asks if he is an elf by any chance, but she shouldn't bother guests with such questions. The guy pats her on the head. The guy says that everything is correct, he is an elf. Is this the first time she sees an elf? She has seen them before, passing by them, but none of them have ever been her guest. She tells him this is his room and to make sure he doesn't lose the key. He thinks it's a bit plain, but the bed is worth the money. He thinks that maybe he will stay here for some time. It will depend on the food. His first dish in Jamphone is bread, wine, and bacon with pasta with white sauce. He finishes eating, and the girl asks him if he liked it. He replies that it was excellent. The food was more than satisfactory. He will definitely stay here while he is in the city. In the Trevian Principality in the Blacksmith's Guild, Jampiona, someone says that 10 spearheads at the deadline, 1 silver coin for each. Eisa will find what he needs here. He believes a job like this is really all he can trust the pioneer with. He understands that. His high-level licenses from Ludria, as well as the name of the famous dwarf, are not taken into account here. He asks to make them, for example, this one. The product is quite rough and they need 10 of them in a week. But there is no upper order limit. He thinks it won't offend anyone if he improves the design. The protagonist thinks that maybe it was because they were curious that their compliments were pleasant. Ace misses the dwarf who raised him, but from the elf's point of view, he parted with him not so long ago. The land on which this union is located is fertile, and the people here are not in poverty. Today he is inspecting the city. He is accompanied by Nonna, a girl from the living room. She was free, so he seduced her to go with him, promising sweets for such words about a girl. In his past life, he would have been arrested. 6 days of work and 1 day of rest, that's what he did in Wistakort. Yesterday he turned in 32 spearheads. He seemed relieved to know that today was his day off. The main character eats and says that it is very tasty. He wipes the girl's face. Remembering the times when he ate the same food day after day, he feels much better enjoying the food. And when he remembers this stone Titanic drifting in a golden sea, he feels even better, albeit briefly. He thinks that maybe this is what is called human culture. This also looks good. Of course, not all of them are ready to enjoy the wealth. Some are discussing that the Atrokian army is invading northern Zaire. The Azet alliance may be called. The girl asks Eisa if something is wrong. He denies it and offers to take his half of the cake, which she happily eats. Azet alliance may be convened, but it's still not certain. All they know is that some northern countries of the Eastern Alliance are sending support to northern Zaire. Eisa thinks that this does not mean that he has intentions to enter the war. He is told that the sword he is working on looks very neat. The next job he received after the arrowheads was to forge the greatest sword he could. The price unlimited. Apparently, the type of sword doesn't matter either. The type he's most familiar with is a straight, one-handed sword, like the one in the Yasogi school. Eisa decides to try a couple of swings, and the boys wonder if they should do the same. Eisa makes a break for it. Practicing the Yashogi style completely focuses his mind. The focus is on the perfect shape of the sword, the perfect size, weight, and balance, and he obviously hasn't forgotten that yet. But while he's still searching for it, his heart is burning. He needs to give form to what he sees in his mind's eye, even if only partially. The only ones who could understand are his 2 masters. But this is not enough for him. In fact, it may even be more than enough. Everyone else just needs to see the result of his work. Then the main character sits by the stove with a hammer and a sword in his hands and refines the weapon, then examines it. Men are surprised and say that this is incredible. But how are they supposed to repeat this? The protagonist goes home, falls on his bed. He is completely exhausted. He has been working at full capacity for about 3 weeks straight. He worked without days off, trying to bring the sword to perfection so that it would satisfy him. The payment was a significant sum of 10 gold coins. Now he does not want to do anything for 3 days. Someone is knocking. The girl comes in and asks Ace if she can bring him food here. He agrees. She helps him all this time. She brought water to his room, allowing him to stay clean and fresh, and secretly brought him extra portions of food. It's simple enough, but seeing her put in the effort motivates him. He owes her a lot. When he's done with this, he'll take her out for dessert again. For now, he can't ask the dwarf master to appraise this sword. Somehow he can't help it, but he feels a little lonely. The girl asks the guy if he forgot anything. He answers no. She says that they will see each other later. When she says that, Eisa actually feels tempted to stay at this hotel again someday. In the end, he stayed in Jampaman longer than planned. It was time for him to move on to be an Odin. The road from city to city takes 2 days. It is not too far, but he needs to ask for directions. Of course, he could travel from city to city in 1 day using a cart, but this would make him seasick, so he travels on foot. Eisa is amazed by the beautiful apples and wonders if he is already in Ardino territory. Ardino is widely known for its fruits. The apple asks him if he will eat it. The guy appreciates the offer, but for others it would look like stealing. Suddenly, he hears something. A man in a hat shouts that it is a greedy boar. He asks to call an adventurer. The boar broke a tree. Suddenly, the boar runs straight towards the protagonist, who manages to get an arrow and aims his bow at the beast. The protagonist then fires a shot, and the arrow flies out of the bow with a whistle, hitting the boar, causing it to fly back. Eitel is asked if he's okay. Eisa killed him to save this man. If he simply lets this end, the boar's death will be in vain. He doesn't want his meat and other materials thrown away. Eisa says that he would like to cut up and cool the meat. Could they show him where the watering hole is? He would also appreciate it if they help him carry it. All 3 people are surprised. The man asks the protagonist to eat because he is literally his savior. The protagonist ends up at their table, with meat on his plate. He is glad that now nothing will be lost. The man reports that there is a village called Palner between this place and Folka, right here on the bank of the river leading to Lake Zaire. They use all the water for washing clothes and butchering hides. Maybe he could leave some for her there. Butchering a hide can take several months if done carefully, which is a long time even for him. He can afford to wait, but he remembers Irena and refuses. He thanks them for everything. He will leave tomorrow. The man says that he can stay as long as he wants, but he is in a hurry. They persuade him to stay for 1 day. However, he still decides to leave. In Palner, he sells the skin. He would like to know how the butchering is done, but he needs to hurry. He decides to take her back the next time he comes here. He looks at Lake Zaire and is surprised it's not even a sea, but still. Lake Zaire is part of the Republic of Zaire, just beyond Folka. The journey from Folka to Laranta takes a full day by boat. The route across the lake is the fastest. The drum is there to help keep the workers in sync. It also helps focus aggressive monsters on the feed while protecting the rest. He thinks about Eitel's comment that Larante is largely similar to Folka. The 2 cities were designed to mirror each other on either side of the lake. Just 1 night in Laranta and he will reach Odin. If he had not spent so much time in Jampaman, he might have been able to explore the city more. But he does not regret anything. Looking back, it was a wonderful journey. Wonderland of magic. His destination just over the horizon. When Eisa arrived in Odin, it was already evening. He talked to many people along the way. The first thing he needed to do was go to the government office. The first step on his path to becoming a mage is to test his aptitude for it in the state office. Magic is a process in which internal magical power, mana, is converted into energy through the use of special techniques, spells. But if he can't pass the test, then he won't be able to learn magic in Odin at all. If he can't pass the test, what should he do? It's too late to say, but he's 90% there thanks to optimism. To even start using magic, you need to have enough mana and talent. The girl asks number 8 to come through. Eisa enters the room, where the man looks at the guy in surprise and says that he has never seen elves in this place. He asks to sit down. Even though he saw the gnomes, he laughs. The gnomes came to take the test in order to create magical equipment. They wanted to learn magic so they could enchant their forework, a magical sword that would be great. Only 2 passed the test, and a long time ago. Not only magical equipment is needed in this area, but also the ability to use it. He opens a box with 2 testing tools. Ace has never seen such material. He takes each one in his hand and needs to carefully connect their ends, after which a light appears, which surprises the main character. They tell him that this is good and his abilities are wonderful, but the man does not think that he can buy them. If he intends to study magic here, let him discuss the various options. The first is the Military Magic Academy. To use magic in military operations, one must have Eastern Union citizenship. The second is the Adventurers Academy, where you can learn to fight monsters and use magic for self-defense, and you are also required to work for 3 years after graduation. The third is Fundamental Magic, where they study the simple principles of magic. The protagonist realizes that this is all wrong. Magic today cannot rely on the power of communion with its spirit. Anyone planning to learn magic will face envy and swift rejection. One is the place to study magic. If problems arise, let them turn to them. The week after the test, he approached many magicians, but each one was hostile and refused him. He must be persistent. There had been no hostility between the two before, and he'd faced rejection. When his motivation waned, he began pouring his energy into working at the forge. Come to think of it, the dwarf must have suspected this might happen. When he mentioned his intention to study swordsmithing and magic, he remembered him saying that isn't the spirit part of magic? He took up blacksmithing to stay active. Should he just join fundamental magic? It sounds simple. He's told about the delivery and the protagonist notices the guy. He informs that the elf and the blacksmith. Whether he is Eisa, the main character says that it is him. Suddenly he kneels down and asks to be accepted as a student. The protagonist understands that this is unexpected. Wants to leave, but he stops him. He will not let him go until he accepts him as a disciple. He agrees to listen to him, only let him go. The guy's name is Kaushman Fiddle. He is a magician and he has his own workshop, so why should he study blacksmithing? He announces his desire to make a magic sword, and Ace supports him. It so happens that several years ago, Kaushman was already an apprentice, his master being the mage Rydal, a dwarf mage rarely seen. He had his own workshop where he could create researching magical equipment. Following his example, the guy began to study magical equipment, but then the dwarf left the city, received an order to return to their kingdom. At least Kaushman had acquired the basic knowledge of magic. For the rest of his growth, the dwarf relied on himself. He left Kaushman with these words. Since then, he only used ready-made tools when researching magical equipment, and now he has become a full-fledged magician in Odin. But he knows nothing about blacksmithing. Eisa asks why he had to look for him specifically. Couldn't he have yearned blacksmithing anywhere? The moment he saw Eisa, he saw his sword in the shop and knew he had to learn from him, and no one else. At first, he wasn't sure a master from the dwarven kingdom would come to town. He immediately came from the blacksmith's guild to confirm. He could hardly believe the creator was an elf, but a man from the guild said he had received a license under the tutelage of a dwarf. When he heard this, he came as quickly as possible. The main character is shocked and thinks about whether his information was leaked. Kaushman begs Eisa that he will do anything. He swears to it, asks to teach him his skills. Remembering his requests to become a disciple, he was always able to stand his ground, although at the same time there was a side of him that wanted to retreat. He didn't even realize he was doing the same thing, so it's worth at least hearing him out. Eisa says that he will teach him blacksmithing if he teaches him witchcraft. He also wants to make a magic sword. The guy agrees. This meeting could only have been a matter of fate, but he is irritated by the fact that it turned out to be him, and he was not the reason for it. In Kaushman's workshop, the protagonist thinks that this place resembles the dwarf master's forge, and he decides to heat up the furnace. The protagonist asks the boy what he'd like to do if he has any wishes. He replies that he can do anything. He just wants to hear the sound of forging iron again. Kaushman truly loves his dwarven master, it seems. Eisa is sure he loves his own more. Since they are going to create a magic sword, the main character will start with an ordinary one. Kaushman is happy. He is a blacksmith, and Kaushman is a magician, and if they ever disagree, they will settle everything with a game. His master did the same. They are both birds that cannot fly on one wing, but by working together, they can soar towards their goal of creating a magic sword, and by the time of year when they no longer need each other, he is confident he can call it his friend. In the morning, they began lessons in witchcraft. First, they learned how to control the mana in the boy's body. They had to try to extract mana without using magical tools and gather power in their fingertips. The main character succeeded. Usually this is an obstacle for humans. Elves are something else. He didn't even know that he was dealing with a high elf. Kaushman says that this will sometimes save them. Everything that affects their mana is part of the formula. In combination, all these things make magic possible. You need to learn how formulas affect mana, analyze the rules, combine them. Magic is the accumulated work of generations of magicians. Now it makes sense from the magician's point of view. Borrowing the power of the spirit may seem dishonest. He did not understand this. It's like calling a bird's ability to fly or a dragon's ability to breathe fire unfair. It's absurd. What good is envy? If he has the will and the ability to study magic, then he has the same right to do so as everyone else. They talked for a long time about the ideal shape for the sword, and between work, they dreamed like children, encouraging innocent and naive conversations because in the end, they are both just boys. Historical evidence indicates that before the fall of the Azed Empire, authoritarian elitism had reached such a level in the magical academies that they had completely lost their usefulness for learning. Research has shown that after the fall of the Azed Empire, the academy must accept all applicants. The state office conducts mandatory testing for mages. Magic for combat and everyday life is now available at the institutes. In-person training is an alternative, as a powerful sorcerer likely resides in the bell tower. The young man mused that after some time alone, he would receive a letter and a package. Looking at the envelope, he concluded that the contents of the package were the very same greedy boar's skin. The young man discovered that the letter contained messages from Arania and immediately began the process of reading, seeing on the first line an address beginning with the words of address to dear noble Eisa. It was reported that the royal family of Lutrian approved the execution of all those opposed to the elves. However, they also believe the nobles are acting against the will of the country and no formal changes regarding the elves have been made. The young man thought this situation was expected. He predicted that within the next 3 to 5 years, the Ludri forest would become overrun with monsters and serve as their refuge. He thought they had already concluded that the return of the elves who had immigrated to Ludria was out of the question until an official public apology followed. He also believed that it would likely be a long time before an apology was received from the royal family. One young man expressed concern that it would be more than 10 years before he could speak with Master Kaina again. Another young man, meanwhile, offered him some tea and added that, based on the other inquiries, there was information about an elf carrying a human child. The second man sat down on the sofa next to her and continued, noting that it was still unknown whether the child would be able to communicate with spirits after reaching a certain age. He also said that the village had wanted the recipient to come and take custody of the child. The boy reflected on the fact that a half-breed's lifespan was half that of a pure-blooded elf. He asked why they wanted him to look after a child who was growing so quickly, considering elves typically raise children communally. The boy realized he had been among those who insisted on the half-breed's return to Earth, and he concluded that he must now bear full responsibility for his previous words. He wondered if he truly had what it took to raise this child with the love he deserved. The recipient thought about the inevitability of the current situation, and the other guy commented that this must be a real emotional roller coaster. The boy mentally reasoned that if it turned out to be a boy, they could catch bugs and go fishing together. He also thought that if it turned out to be a girl, he would love her forever. He said the child didn't necessarily need to be able to communicate with spirits, and that their hostility toward friends and parents was perfectly natural. He noted that there were many paths in life: blacksmithing, swordsmanship, witchcraft, etc., and if the child wanted to choose a new one, they could explore it together. The boy declared that even if he outlived the recipient and they died before him, he would still show them love. He added that he was willing to admit to being called selfish, condescending, and pointy-eared. He expressed confidence that this is why he has everything he needs to become a protector and closest friend to the child. As he wrapped the letter, the young man made a decision. In his reply, he would express his anticipation for the birth of his child. However, he reflected that this momentous event would still be some time away. The first guy, in his first year of meditation, told the second guy he had an idea. The second guy responded by asking what it was. The first guy stated that magical tools were unusual because they required an investment of magic to use. He wondered why those who used them didn't simply cast spells directly. The second guy agreed, noting that using regular magic was even faster. The interlocutor agreed that direct magic was usually better, but added that in the event of an ambush, it would be preferable to use magical tools. It was noted that if a magic spell involves the verbal recitation of a formula, then excessive haste in the process could lead to a complete loss of combat effectiveness. The recipient countered that having a magic tool that only took a moment to activate would be more reliable and would literally be a savior. The interlocutor argued that since a wizard can cast any number of spells, a single-function magic tool becomes impractical. Therefore, a magic item must be disposable to increase its value. The guy replied that he truly didn't know the answer. In any case, he added that it was unknown whether such a tool would ever be used, or whether it would even be functional. The first guy quickly responded by saying that the idea sounded very interesting, and the second guy immediately suggested that they start trying to implement it. The young man was delighted and declared that a short metal rod would be ideal for implementing the idea. The second man following him impatiently suggested that it would be better to start small, with just a long staff. Eventually, they moved on to the practical part. They began to simultaneously make something and also began to work with theories expressed in reading and writing. It was noted that by the third year, practicing magic is quite simple. A mage's power, it was said, lies in the number of spells they cast, so training is simply a matter of memorization. The character noted that he only remembers things that are of personal interest to him. He added that it's very important to him how often he's been insulted, called a stupid idiot, or using similar expressions. Several key events are reported to have occurred over the past 3 years. The Drothian army invaded the northwestern United Union of Northern Zaire in full force. Consequently, the Kingdom of Northern Zaire requested support from the EXILED alliance. It was reported that students from the Military Magic Academy were also sent to the front, and one of them even took their staff into battle. Ultimately, that staff helped save lives. It was determined that the student had found himself in a difficult situation as a result of a nighttime rearguard raid by Trotsky's cavalry. This is precisely why he panicked, but he was able to erect a protective barrier in time. It was noted that the army mages were apparently pleasantly surprised by how the apprentice, a mere novice mage, handled the surprise attack. This incident led to their small defensive staff immediately attracting considerable attention. Kaushman is currently the only researcher in all of Odin who specializes in magical instruments. The question was asked whether the recipient had received any requests for training in the art of creating magical instruments, and whether he intended to accept any of them. The young man simply declined. The elf asked the boy whether his status as a full-fledged mage would be confirmed by the apprentice's maturation. The boy categorically declared that his interlocutor was mistaken twice, and explained that his goal was to study magical instruments and swords. The elf immediately reminded him that he was aware of the boy's need to publish his scientific research. The boy thought about how if he became a hermit, his research into magical instruments would cease, and he remembered how the military had forced him to publish his research. The boy sitting on the floor declared that he didn't care about rights or anything like that. The elf explained that once all the publications were completed, they could move on to the Magic Ball project. He proposed dividing the work, the recipient would create the necessary spell, and the elf would engrave it directly onto the blade. The recipient suggested that the sooner the work was completed, the sooner they could start a new, exciting project. The young man, in a state of despair, scratched his head and approved. The interlocutor assured the other that he would complete the task as quickly as possible and advised him to begin preparing for the sword forging process. After this, the young man smiled, and they sealed the agreement with a fist bump. He stated that in 2 years, his departure would be necessary to assume guardianship of the half-elf. He was also convinced that by the time of his departure, he and Kaushman would have fully completed the exchange of relevant skills, that is, mutual training. He concluded that, therefore, in 2 years they would both leave this place at the same time, and as a result of their work, each would have a magic sword of their own making. The elf told the young man that completing the task would require the full benefit of their combined abilities and expressed the need to begin creating a prototype immediately. Therefore, he asked the young man to expedite the process of publishing all his materials. It was established that they had labored hard to create their project. Their work was characterized by an intensive exchange of knowledge, which was essential for joint success. It was recorded that they were entering their 4th year of activity. During this period, they both simultaneously expressed surprise while observing a certain object. Smiling, one of the boys announced the completion of the magic sword. This announcement immediately caused both of them to express their joy. The boy asked Elf what they should do next and suggested testing the blade. Elf replied that they simply needed to test its functionality. The elf gave the boy a direct order to begin the activation, channeling his magical energy into the blade. The boy quickly confirmed his readiness to carry out the command. The addressee began to explain the reason for their acquaintance, but he was abruptly interrupted by an exclamation that the magic sword had been successfully completed. It occurred to him that their meeting might not have been accidental, but rather dictated by fate itself. Afterward, both interlocutors exchanged smiles. The first interlocutor announced to the second that it was time to create his own magic sword and asked to give it a try. The second man agreed, but specified that he could only try it for a short time. With the advent of 5th year, the girl announced it was time to begin the martial arts exam and asked if their preparation was complete. The elf confidently agreed. Affirming his readiness, Elf mentally noted that after successfully passing the exam, he would finally receive his mage certificate. It was determined that if he did not officially become a wizard, his actions would effectively create a barrier for less experienced mages. Because of this, Odin's chief wizards attempted to implore him to take the exam. It sounded in Elf's mind that neither he nor Kaushman attached any importance to such things as formal ranks, honor, or any other such nonsense. He began to wave his hand in a demonstration or attack manner, releasing a stream of magic. As a result of his action, a powerful and destructive blow was dealt. Elf's thoughts echo that there were people in this world who would unhesitatingly go to extreme lengths to remove any obstacles. Since Kaushman still lacked official status as a mage, he himself was such an obstacle, and therefore Elf believed it was his duty to make Kaushman a fully fledged mage. Summarizing the situation, Elf stated that he would reimburse him for all services rendered previously. Then, turning to Ace, Elf announced to Feidla, Kaushman's student, that he had successfully passed the exam, expressing deep gratitude. The elf appeared in the room and announced his arrival. The boy greeted him and asked him to tell him how things had gone. The elf, clearly proud of the moment, enthusiastically announced the elven blacksmith's name, adding to it the title of Tire Mage Ace. Congratulations immediately followed from the boy, who, however, declined the offered thanks, redirecting it to the elf. The boy asked the elf if this meant he was going after the half-breed child. The elf briefly confirmed this. The narrator's thoughts flashed back 5 years to when he had just begun studying magic. Now that a magical world had been created, ready for travel, the time had come for him and Koshman to set off in different directions. Addressing Eisa, the guy admitted that he had never particularly felt love for children, but he would be very interested to know what kind of child Eisa would raise. He asked if the noisy children were too much for him, to which the boy replied in the affirmative. After that, Elf wondered if Koshman would ever want to pass on his knowledge and skills to someone else. He was reported to have shown no interest in romantic relationships for 5 years, and the narrator was his only student during that time. The interviewee expressed the opinion that even if knowledge and skills are impermanent, skills acquired with your hands will stay with you forever. Thoughtfully, he repeated that he would never understand the strangeness of the fact that it was optimized just for his personal use. You know? He expressed concern that the damned dwarf master, upon seeing his complexly crafted magic sword with a thin blade, would want to split it in half. It was noted that even a hammer is powerless against a sword when it is imbued with magic, and the engraved spell increases its strength and sharpness. He said the sword was crafted from elven silver, allowing it to draw magic simply by being near a mage. He then described the sword, saying it was some kind of magical object. The elf explained that elven silver draws magic upon physical contact. He added that he could thus channel magic into the sword directly through the scabbard simply by donning it, and reminded the reader that, as the saying goes, one should expect the unexpected. According to the narrator, the only person who could appreciate his magic sword was his fencing master. He admitted that the magic sword of Nightmare was clearly more powerful but incredibly limited in its application. After learning of the sword's limitations, one character asked about an ice element for it, which would be a pretty neat upgrade. Then the second replied, "Ice, that sounds nice." It was noted that no matter how similar their paths with Koshman, mentor and student, were, they still had to go different ways, which would diverge just like their magic swords. The character concluded that he would stay in this place, to which the elf agreed and said goodbye. The elf wondered what if in the future the child he would take under his wing wanted to study magic. Then it was possible they would have to visit this place again. His thoughts suggested that when the event in question did occur, Koshman would likely already be in middle age, or perhaps even in old age. A desire arose in his mind. He wanted to present Koshman with a completely new, revolutionary magic sword that he was planning to create by that time, and he was absolutely convinced that this achievement would be a real breakthrough. The interlocutor recalled that before going with Yina to Zinx, he tried to study the area using homemade maps. As he looked at the map, he thought about how he had only recently learned to cast spells. Weetown was famous for its fish, and about Zudria. They said it was a good place to be born because of the fall of the nobility. At the same time, he was worried about what the further increase in influence of the royal family and demons would do to the country. Looking at the maps, he wondered if he would be able to reach the capital in the shortest possible time. At the same time, he also wondered how the meeting with the children of the High Elf would go. The hero reached the hotel, which was located in the outskirts of the capital city of Zaynetz. The elf said hello and then said words of apology. The girl greeted him, noting that a lot of time had passed. She added that she clearly remembered their first meeting and complimented him on his appearance, saying that he looked much better than last time. She reported that, according to her information, the Ludras were already in the final stage of negotiations and were closer than ever to offering an apology to the elven side, after which she invited her interlocutor to take a seat. She reported that large numbers of people have fled the country's eastern regions where the tragic incident occurred, fearing an imminent catastrophe. She also added that the situation is being exacerbated by dwindling food supplies and a poor harvest, adding that they had also begun selling Pelagia abroad. The girl noted that this was attracting unwanted attention from other countries. Having said this, someone in the room declared that they needed to take action. She suggested that Royal would miss the opportunity to take action while they still had a chance to reorganize. He, in turn, acknowledged that it might be too early, but expressed gratitude, saying he couldn't have achieved this result without her help. The girl retorted that she was only following Maestro Iser's example and doing what she thought was right. The girl firmly stated that she does not support Klaus and Martinia, because she does not want the country where her relatives live to be destroyed because of their actions. Despite the remaining questions, she expressed confidence that Irina would cope with all the difficulties and solve all the problems on her own. The girl enthusiastically declared that Irina was an undeniable heroine for her, adding in conclusion that there was no need to worry about further developments. The girl said that he was currently sleeping. We assured the guy by clarifying that she had asked the genie to inform him of his arrival as soon as he woke up, and in conclusion, she heard in response the assurance that he was ready to wait. The man asked if he could really do something. to which the girl assured him that she knew of his deep feelings for them. He then explained that this was precisely why the matter was so important to half-elves, who had less time than they did. The girl, expressing concern, said that it would break his heart, Mr. Acer, and the guy wondered if she really cared about his feelings, or if she was comparing him to someone else. The girl said that she was worried about the length of her life after his death, and admitted that she chose Klaus, a human, out of fear of his possible demise. The guy replied that he couldn't make such long-term plans, and the girl in turn emphasized that even Irena would live much less than she did. The upset elf stated that the fear of loss was so great that if everything continued in the same spirit, he would not be able to have any connections with anyone. The very thought of such an existence was repugnant to him. He said that, sadly, this was merely food for thought. He also said that while memories of this man had practically faded, his words remained. He noticed an icon appear or a melody begin to play. The guy said he was observing an awakening and got ready to leave. The boy thought about humans, dwarves, and half-elves, and their reluctance to lose touch with each other, despite the fact that their lives have different lengths. He stated that despite the long life ahead of him, and even longer as a spirit, he intended to make a choice now, to live life to the fullest, without regrets. The boy told how he opened the door to the baby's bedroom and watched him as he rubbed his eyes, trying to wake up. The boy thought to himself that the baby was very cute. The baby saw him. As the boy approached, he thought the baby probably didn't have a name yet. Eventually, he said hello to the baby. The baby tried to say something, but the boy, looking at him, thought that it was really very beautiful. The boy expressed the opinion that immortality surpassed even the elven soul. He recalled how, upon meeting Irena, she had immediately recognized him as a high elf. He guessed that this child must have a very keen eye. He came to the conclusion that the ability to recognize this meant that if he could turn to the spirits for help, it would make his life much easier and he would have a true friend for all time. As the little boy touched his face, trying to get to know him, the boy thought it must look weird. But he was having fun, and the little boy liked it too. The boy noticed an envelope that read, "Born in winter, no name yet." He inwardly approved of this, considering it not bad. The boy told the child that his name was now Win, and his name was Acer, the high elf of the forest who was also called Maple Boy. After stroking the baby on the head, the boy announced that from now on he was his guardian and friend. The boy said he was glad to meet Vin, and the boy suddenly started to seem like he was crying. But then the baby reached out to the boy and he thought how happy he was to see him. Addressing the baby, he said he was happy to care for him, glad he was born, and especially glad he was here, giving the baby a little bounce. He considered his next steps. He figured that traveling without a clear plan would be difficult for Vin. He also figured that if she found out, he'd be in for a lecture. He noted that they still needed to work hard and set an example of working adults. The main question was, who would help him look after Win during this time? He spoke of the approaching storm in Rudrius and suggested waiting until the king apologized and the situation in the country returned to normal. He emphasized that the Valester Republic tribe was reliable enough, but not for those conducting secret espionage activities in the city. The boy thought nothing good could be expected from Kaushman of Odin. He figured he'd definitely teach Win some nasty games, just like he taught him. The boy reminded him that he didn't like children. The girl sitting at the table expressed surprise and admitted she hadn't expected him to be so considerate. She added, however, that she hadn't meant to offend him. The man noted that she had every opportunity to act at her own discretion, assess any situation, and make decisions on the spot. He assured her that he knew the truth. She asked about his departure plans, and he replied that he planned to leave the following day around noon. It was decided that Eisa and the child would leave this place at noon, and before that they fell asleep together with the baby. The boy wondered why he decided to take the child. He said Win could say hello, and the child confirmed he could. The girl excitedly declared that she was very happy to meet Win. She added that he could share with her whatever he wanted while he was there. Then she leaned over and asked if she could hug the baby, to which he responded affirmatively. The guy told the girl he'd come to town to find someone to look after Win while he worked. He emphasized that he was looking for someone he could completely trust, and he mentioned her. The man offered the girl a handsome reward for her services, noting that he planned to stay in the city for a year or two. The woman responded by expressing confidence that he would take care of everything and convince her mother to agree. She then added that she was very glad he remembered her. She approached the little boy, inviting him to stay home with her. The boy silently remarked that this was excellent, although Win didn't seem to understand yet. However, he expressed confidence that he would get used to it with time. The boy expressed hope that he would be able to adapt to the new environment and offered to work together to achieve this. He admitted that he felt better, but he was terribly hungry. The girl replied that it was a macaroni casserole, which she thought Win could easily eat, and offered to feed the baby. When the baby saw the berries, it was noticeable how his eyes sparkled with delight. The little boy remarked that the apples he ate there were very tasty. Someone reacted with surprise. The girl noticed that elves loved apples. She wondered how many elves would come if they offered apple dishes. The boy confirmed that elves did indeed love the fruit. The little one thought the pie was delicious. He added that he liked both meat and fish, as well as all the vegetables. The little boy considered himself very lucky. He began to think that when Win grew up a little, he would like to travel with him to many places and try a variety of delicious dishes. He guessed that Win would really enjoy traveling and would like to do it together. The boy thought that, compared to him, he, a little one, didn't have much time. A man called out to him. The boy turned and asked what he was listening to. The man apologized for disturbing him and asked to come see him later. He was a member of the blacksmith's guild, for whom the boy had worked just a few weeks about 6 years ago. He noted that he was pleased that Vin hadn't forgotten him and thought that perhaps he would offer him some work. However, he decided to temporarily take a break from work to spend time with Vin and contact the union a little later. A month later, the man informed the boy that the work he wanted to entrust to him, Mr. Eisa, consisted of 2 points. The first was the repair of the armor used by the city guard, with payment based on the volume of work performed. The second was technical supervision. The man told the boy that a sword he had previously owned was on display at their blacksmith's guild. He explained that the mistress who served him had learned of his return to town and asked him to go on business. The man apologized for the inconvenience and thanked the boy. After offering 3 options, the man said the boy could choose the one he liked. After some thought, the boy chose the first task armor repair. The man replied that with his skills, he could earn a lot of money. The man warned the young man that if he turned down another job, their association wouldn't be able to stop him. The young man, in turn, expressed hope for advice if any difficulties arose. The man, after seeing the boy off, indicated that he would be working in this forge. The boy expressed great pride at the opportunity to work alongside a blacksmith like himself. The other workers began to express surprise upon recognizing him as Eisa. They confirmed it was him, noting the passage of time, and expressed their joy at seeing him. They began to chat with him cordially, saying they hadn't seen him for a while. Someone was shouting loudly at Eisa, asking him not to leave. The little boy was crying, begging the boy not to leave him for work. The girl hugged the little boy and wished him luck. Holding the baby close, the girl thought that it was only recently that Weiss hadn't been able to speak. She asked him if he wanted to go out to play that evening. The baby, through his tears, asked again. She asked little Win why he didn't go to the well, since he had so many friends there. The girl was thinking about how cute he was when he played with other children, and how soon he would be all grown up. Suddenly, someone showed the little boy a cockroach, and he burst into tears. The girl hugged him and asked if he was scared, noting that it was ugly. The girl expressed her wish for the boy to always remain like this. Then she asked him what he wanted to do right now. The boy thought that today's day off he would devote to a hike in which he would teach Win something new, and he considered this an excellent prospect. Wit said it was too early to teach Win to fight, and that he needed to wait until he was older. He considered what he could teach him in the wild, spiritualism, the practice of asking for help from spirits. He said the nature spirits often help them, and he is grateful for it. He added that the spirits are also happy to help them, and that the Wind spirit who has long been with Win longs to be called upon for help. He noted that achieving greater strength requires considering many factors. He added that this is still a long way off, but many opportunities lie ahead. He decided he needed to ask the spirit for help, as it would be too difficult for Vin. He noted that the boy responded to the gifts with joy and even began to show signs of affection. He noted that they were very good at making requests. He reflected on himself, and given Win's upbringing, he assumed this was inevitable. That's why he wanted to master the art of communicating with spirits. He emphasized that it is important to strive to seek and not just take, as this is the true value in life. The boy asked the spirit of the wind to allow the leaves to dance on the trees. The guy also asked him. He added that Win and the wind spirit wanted to play. Starting with the art of communicating with spirits, he gradually taught Win everything he knew. Then he asked how many there were, and they began counting the coins. Win was actually 7. He explained that children learn slowly if everything is explained clearly. In the future, Win will need to learn how to handle money, as he truly strives for knowledge. Perhaps it's because he and Nona care so much about him. He admitted that the thought of Win's birth was a difficult one for him. However, his position was firm. He needed to love him as much as possible to compensate for his shortcomings. He noted that it was more like he was showering him with too much love. A year later, the girl asked Win why he didn't attend church. She expressed confidence that he was very grateful for learning to read and write and that it would help him communicate better. He answered affirmatively. He expressed a desire for people to perceive the world according to their own values, not those of others. He noted that the church tests children for magical abilities during free classes. talented children are sent to the church and receive a reward for their efforts. The guy, hiding the boy, noted that he had no financial difficulties, and for this reason he did not want to part with Win. As an elf, he ages a year every 10 years, while for Win, as a half-elf, it would take him about 2 or 3 years. He noted that since all human children grow differently, Luwin would always look younger, and he would definitely have to deal with that problem over time. The boy reflected that for the half-elf Win, time flowed very differently from both human and high elves. He supposed there were more suitable places for this. Then he called Nona. The boy asked her a favor to listen to him. She asked if it would be a long story. He considered skipping it, considering she was a traveler of another race and would be embarrassed. He was sure she wouldn't insist if he said so. But he couldn't lie to her. The boy clarified that he wasn't a Rifia elf, but Win was a half-elf. He noted that it was only thanks to her that they felt so good together. He was sure it was all thanks to her. A year and a half later, Irn wrote that they could head to Rudia. He said he was trying to convince him in every way possible, believing he really liked it here. The baby was crying. The boy wondered if he should give Nona a gift as a token of his gratitude for everything and say goodbye. The boy told the little boy who brought him a stone in his palm that the first thing they needed to do was find a very beautiful stone. The passerby wondered what he was doing there, working on a rare stone, but decided that the gift would probably be appreciated. That's what the guy thought. The boy expressed his deep gratitude to the girl for everything. Then the baby said Nona's name, to which the girl responded briefly. The kid said that he and Asa made it especially for her and that he wanted to give it to her. The girl asked if she could open the gift. The boy said yes. Inside was a garnet ornament. Starting to cry, the girl cried out several times and expressed regret that she wanted to see Vin off and have a little laugh. Starting to cry, the girl cried out several times and expressed regret that she wanted to see Vin off and have a little laugh. He started crying too and said he didn't want to leave him forever. But then the boy grabbed him and carried him, and the baby started screaming for Ace to let him go. He stated that no matter how much they wished, he could not leave him alone in Jumpernet, and repeated that he could not. He noted that Nona could take care of herself, but she didn't have the strength he did to protect Win. He explained that although he couldn't put it off any longer, he feared this farewell was forced. He regretted that Nona was crying and said he didn't want to hurt her. He regretted that their farewell hadn't been more peaceful. He announced that they were now heading to Ludria, where he would help Arena by protecting her from monsters. He didn't want anything to happen to Arena, as Win would be very upset. He noted that this was a very suitable place for Winyu to understand the passage of time, as there were many people there. The baby said he cries a lot, but they're either happy or he's angry. He added that they've been through a lot and he wants to grow up soon. In the kingdom of Ludoria, the main character walks down the street with a child in his arms and calms him down. Everyone looks at him askance and talks about something behind his back. The elf thinks that because of the earthquake it was not possible to pass through the eastern part. He feels how everyone is staring at them. This is expected. The man suddenly asks him if he is that same elf nomad. It is clear to him that he decided to return. The guy remembers that this man once made him a knife. The man says that it was a long time ago. He heard a lot of rumors about him. The man realizes he's going to Keihi's dojo and asks to take it with him absolutely free. The protagonist happily stands outside with a package. He thanks the man, who tells him he'll stay in the capital and if he needs a new knife, he should ask. He asks who this child is next to. If he wants meat, then let him come into the shop. They have the best meat in the whole capital. The child waves to him. The main character and the child are walking up the stairs and they ask him who they are. This is the dojo Isogi. Entry is not permitted to outsiders. The boy explains that he came to them with good intentions. The man awkwardly thanks him, and the elf gives him a package. This is an important person in their dojo, their first disciple. He restored the dojo and then abandoned it. The woman turns to Ace and tells him that they are a bit early. The guy says that not even 10 years have passed. Kaiheha looks at the child. Eisa says that his name is Win and they took him in and became friends. Kaiheha understands this and tells the boy that he hasn't changed. She appeals to Misuha and Shizuka to treat Win like their little brother, which they both happily agree to. Kei says Eisa can have the room he used to sleep in and asks if he should feed them. Eisa would be happy to, telling the woman that her children look like her and she says he hasn't changed. A few weeks later, the protagonist is playing tag with the children and they turn to him. They understand that he cares about the children, but isn't it time for him to pay attention to the master? He and the children look at them. For the past few weeks, Eisa had spent most of her time reforging swords for Keihi or playing with Win and the children. Since the children were in first place, they rarely saw each other. Therefore, the students feared her, as she seethed with rage at being ignored. The last time the boy picked up a sword was about a month ago. Keiha has grown and probably become stronger. If he shows what he's capable of, maybe she'll stop calling him. He asks her if she appreciates his swordsmanship. The girl looks at him seriously, sighs, and says, "Not with a wooden sword. Let him use the one he carries with him." The guy is surprised. The magic sword made by Kashman. He doesn't think he's ready and able to use it to its full power, but he takes it out anyway. After this, the main character shows off several sword techniques while everyone looks at him. Keikia is surprised by this, just like everyone else. The protagonist realizes that he has not disgraced himself and someone is addressing him. The girl's face is tense and he wonders if something is wrong. She asks him to listen. It's not that simple. She wants to ask him a lot, but first she'll evaluate his skills. She sees that during his travels he continued to train. His skills have become noticeably better than before, but they do not look at all the training. He never once used his skills. Tempering one's skills not for combat is nothing more than a show. It tells the guy that he has not used his sword to become stronger. The guy thinks he once cut his opponent's sword in Verstrika. But this is no different from Kai's street performances. He has absolutely no combat experience. The girl tells him that at this rate, she doesn't think he will be able to develop the skills of a fencer. She admits that his weakness is the lack of fighting spirit. She also says that this trait suits him very well, and Ace thinks about how he can fix it. Several weeks later, in the northern part of Ludoria near the border with the Fodor Empire, the boy is informed that they will be waiting for his return. This time, Irene asked him to prevent a possible invasion from the Fodor Empire. Now the military power of Ludoria has weakened due to the change of king and the unstable situation. The kingdom itself is to blame for this, but occupation cannot be allowed. Because the protagonist doesn't want the negotiations to be meaningless, he thinks that the current Ludoria treats the elves very closely. In short, the elves don't need new neighbors. If they were already familiar, it would be much easier. Being close to them would help Ludoria in many ways. The guy stands in front of the road and understands that this is the place. It hurts him to block the path that people paved with their own hands. The protagonist turns to the spirit of the earth, who lives in the majestic mountains, and asks him to hear his call to block this road. He will bring down a rock. After this, the rock collapses. The protagonist looks at this and thinks that decades will pass before the road is built again, and the kingdom will stop constantly turning to the elves. He wonders if he could fight the soldiers of the empire, or if he would lack the determination. One can fantasize a little. But he doesn't think he can do anything like that. The main character likes the elegance of Keihi's sword, so he wanted to fence like her. He almost achieved this. But he needs to become stronger. There is no motivation. Maybe it is arrogant. But he thinks that he is strong enough, so he doesn't mind being an ordinary amateur rather than a professional. But perhaps the time will come when he will change his mind. He decided to tell the girl about it. She said that it was like him. It was a pity that she wouldn't see what a great swordsman he would become. It was a pity. A year later, he is still Keihi's apprentice and lives in Yashogi, currently forging a sword that is to be a gift to the king at the fair. But her expression cannot get out of his head. He needs to have fun and distract himself. The main character happily decides to go somewhere with Win later. He sweeps the floor and Shizuki turns to him. Eisa asks what's going on. He says he has a favor to ask. The guy asks to be taken to Wistakort. The protagonist doesn't understand why, but it's not a bad thing. He wanted to go somewhere after all. Eisa says it'll be a long trip, no pack, and he should ask Grandma or Keihi for permission. Shizuki thinks that his grandmother wouldn't mind. He'll ask her. He thanks Eisa, who wonders if that means Kaieha would mind. Shizuki received permission and the guy's soul was at peace. Win became very attached to Shizuki and Mizuha and was not against going with them. During the hike, they collected firewood, roasted meat over a fire, and Eisa realized that they both had a lot of fun. At Wistakort, the boy shows his citizenship and is let through. That day, they passed through the gates together with Irene and Martin Cross. Then the guy met that dwarf. 15 years had already passed since he left this city. The guy cries and asks Win not to worry because everything is fine. He was just overcome with nostalgia. These are tears of happiness. The protagonist joyfully greets Rodan, who was just remembering his first visit to the city. Rodan didn't even think that they would see each other, and he was glad to see him. He wishes Ace and the boys a welcome to Viscot, and the boy thanks him. At Claes and Martin's house, the boy is asked who he is, and he introduces himself to the woman. He asks if Claes or Martin is home. He came for the key to his house. She wants to ask the owner, and a woman appears from behind, addressing Ace. She is glad that he has returned. He tells her that she has become a stately lady. Did he want to get the key to his house? But it is dirty there. It needs to be tidied up. She asks him to stay for a while. Claes will be back soon. She also notices that he came with children. Eisa asks if she has heard from Irene. This is little Win, and this is Shizuki. He is looking after him in the capital. Claes returned almost immediately after his arrival, but his biggest surprise was not seeing him or Win. But when he looked at Shizuki, maybe it's because he's Shizuka and Mizuha's father. But how did it happen? They knew each other, but it was more like friendship. He doesn't think Kaya is the type to destroy a family. No matter who Win's parents are, Eisa will never stop loving him, so both Keiha and her mother love them both. The main character goes to bed with the children. He doesn't need to know everything. He will always be on the children's side. At the table, Shizuki approaches Rudria's best swordsman, Lord Claudius, and challenges him, which surprises the protagonist and Win. Shizuki suggests fighting with wooden swords after the meal, and he doesn't mind, and the protagonist understands why he wanted to come here. After that, they fight in the street with wooden swords, and the man hits the guy in the stomach with a sword. He says it again. It was his technique, not his strength, that made Claudius a master swordsman. Win asks Shizuki not to give up. You could say that Shizuki is growing up to be a genius, partly thanks to his surroundings. But for Claudius, he is no rival. He knocks the sword out of his hands and he gets angry. He asks to attack again. Shizuki may not understand that Claudius wants to establish contact with his father, but through the sword. But how do adults feel about this? What do they think about it, and how do they react? It seems everyone except Shizuka has no evil intentions. Then he has no need to worry. They're bound by the thread of fate. They would have met one day anyway. If you look at their fight, they were supposed to meet, the man accidentally hits the guy in the nose. He does not give up and tries to win, so Ace sees in the boy the desire to become stronger. The man asks if he hit hard. Maybe he needs it. Shizuki suggests they fight again. About a month later, the girl angrily asks why only Shizuki went. It's not fair. When they returned, he was attacked by an indignant Mizuha. Next time he would have to go somewhere with her. All that was left was to get permission from her parents. It would be good if they were gone for at least a couple of days. He would make a sword to apologize. It was forged under pressure from Mizuha to earn her forgiveness. Today they are walking through the forest near the capital. There are fewer strong monsters here now, so it is safe to walk. They have worked hard together. Eisa is asked about what is in the cave. The boy tells her that there's a huge snake monster's lair there and it's best not to touch it. The girl asks if he'll defeat the monster, and he says yes. In that case, she'll have to be eaten for lunch. He doesn't like killing without reason, even if it's a monster. They're not here to kill monsters, so they better just leave. The girl is uneasy about what the guy said. The children of the head of the dojo are well-mannered and unselfish, but they are still little children, and although they have a loving mother and grandmother, they still lack fatherly love. That's why Shizuki challenged Claudius, trying to defeat him, and Mizuha is a girl, so she threw a tantrum upon their return. They are both still sweet and innocent. The girl asks the stopped guy if he is coming. Later they come across a huge tree. This is a tree of spirits, which will not appear if there is no one with them who can see them. He decided to show it to them. Without him, they will not be able to find it. Since it is very important for the elves, it has grown even stronger and probably has a lot of fruits. This tree is blooming out of season. The guy thinks it's very happy to see them. And now they're going to go look for a snack. By evening, their menu for today is fried mushrooms and rabbit. Mizuha thanks Eisa for hanging out with her today. She had fun. She asks if she would have made a good adventurer. He says he has no idea, but he'd understand better if she ate the snake. She's angry that they're laughing at her. Mizuki is still under 10 years old. She'll still have a chance to choose her own path. If she wants to become an adventurer, then maybe he should also prepare weapons and armor for her, like he did before. The children measure their height, and Win starts to cry and gets angry when he sees that he is shorter than Mizuha and Shizuki. They calm him down. 8 years have passed since the protagonist came to this dojo. Mizuha and Shizuki approach him, and he asks them if they chip the blade again. They deny it. He is informed that his grandmother is calling him. He asks Win to replace him. The boy is sweeping the floors at this time and asks if her flame is dying down. He will take care of everything here. Eisa thanks the boy. The twins were already 15 years old, and he'd given them swords each, but Win was still lagging far behind. It's no wonder he noticed he wasn't growing up quite like them. There was nothing he could do about it, so he distanced himself from them. Nevertheless, the guy is very grateful to the twins for the fact that they spent a lot of time with him. Now Win is at a problematic age. Eisa is still glad to be back at the dojo. He asks if he can enter, and they allow him in. Keihi's mother hasn't been feeling well lately, perhaps due to her age and poor health. The main character understands that she will die very soon. The grandmother says that she wanted to apologize to him. When her husband died, she thought that he would soon die too and leave Kaya alone. But then he appeared. There were only 2 women in the house, so she was wary of him at first, but he quickly became a part of their lives. He not only cured her illness and ended their feud with Lord Rin, but also restored their dojo. Thanks to him, her daughter grew up to be a wonderful swordsman, and he asked nothing in return. He was satisfied with the position of a student. For them, he became a guiding light on their path. The grandmother asks him to believe it, but on the day he left, he cursed her daughter. She is sure that he did not do it on purpose. She gave birth to children and raised them, recruited students and protected the dojo, honed her sword skills. It was not easy for her, but she did all this so that he could return here one day. The guy is surprised by this. She wanted to have children, so she turned to the famous swordsman and his wife with a very unusual request. The protagonist is shocked and doesn't understand why they didn't simply refuse her. And what about Irene? She left Claudius because of the difference in life expectancy. Could that really be why Martina didn't refuse? She doesn't know why, maybe because something was bothering them too, so they didn't refuse her daughter, or they were afraid to refuse. In the end, even though they fulfilled her daughter's wish, the main character asks what kind of curse it was. She reports that love. She was in love with him. A love that even with time will never fade. She wanted to pass on her sword to her children, so that he could return here and be waited for here. He is sure that she would not want him to know this. She does not want to take this secret with her. Until this moment, she was terribly offended and angry at him. But now she feels better. She loved them like a real mother. She believed that her grandchildren would grow up to be worthy people, and he also returned, making her smile. She takes the guy's hand. The grandmother asks the main character not to forget her love. The guy agrees, and after this conversation, she left this world after 5 days. Days spent in grief for the departed loved ones will not change anything. Everything will become a thing of the past. 2 years later, in Aswald, the main character received a letter from the dwarf. In the end, he needs a smart assistant and he asks to come. It is not surprising that he noticed him. For the past few years, he has always taken first place in sword forging competitions. Not that he has become better at it, but the dwarf who previously took first place has returned to his homeland. The reason for this was the election of a new dwarven king in their country. Blacksmithing skills are directly linked to his social status, and this time serious competitions are planned. Perhaps the main character is too proud, but he wants to believe that this dwarf will try to fulfill the promise he made to him, to build a land where elves could play. The protagonist tells Wynn that he's going to the land of the dwarves and asks the boy what he'll do. The protagonist suggests that he stay here, but he decides to go with him, otherwise he will do some nonsense without him. The protagonist asks in bewilderment if he takes him for a fool. He agrees and decides to learn how to communicate with the dwarves. They'll have a long conversation. Elves and dwarves generally get along well, so maybe Wynn will find a friend among the dwarves. 3 months later, he tells the girl that they are leaving tomorrow. She asks him if they are saying goodbye forever, and he promises to return. He knows that time is moving differently for him, but in his last moments, he wants to be with her. It took him time to realize a lot. He wants to be close to her. This is his response to her feelings. Death is not necessarily the end of everything. He was reborn here. The guy has been living as a high elf for a long time. It's quite possible that she's also somewhere here, a little miracle. However, when he sees her end, it will remain in his memory for a long time. She says that this is a promise. She tells him with a smile that she will be looking forward to seeing him in her last moments of life. He understands that her face is now noticeably burdened with age, but she is still beautiful. The boys moving through the snow in the mountains towards the master uttered a cry. The man asked if he was coming with him. He also added that he had always considered elves weak creatures. To clarify, he agreed, saying he was involved in sports and that some of his training took place in the mountains, where it was cooler than the forge, and that he carried all his belongings. The man replied that it was lighter than iron ore. The elf asked if he, the big fellow, was asleep, noting that there was only one mountain left. He assumed they were ordinary elves, since humans weren't allowed into the dwarf country. He explained that entry was only permitted to those who had received special permission from the dwarf or his dignitary, or who possessed an advanced blacksmith's license from a large country, and he had both. He said that he had asked the blacksmith's guild to find a guide for the dwarf, and this had caused a somewhat restrained reaction. After a short chat at the bar, he mentioned that his mentor was a remarkable man. He added that he had been living in Ludlow for several years when he received a letter from him asking for help. The man replied that he understood. Then he added that, although he was still drinking, he had already managed to lose himself in memories. The elf hiccuped. The man simply offered to drink. He declared that if the elves could navigate the mountain trail, he would take them with him, as he was leaving in 3 days. Or so he believed he had done, setting out with his guide 2 weeks ago. He said the dwarf country is located underground, and in human terms, it resembles a city-state. According to the guide, tens of thousands of dwarves lived there. At the entrance, they were stopped by security guards. The boy noticed that it was warm inside. The man pointed out that this was Aswald's house. Upon entering, the man indignantly asked why the elves were there and who they thought they were to set foot on their land. The man, calling himself the Voice, ordered them to retreat. The other exclaimed that he couldn't believe they were elves. The elf reflected that he'd always known dwarves behaved better when they expressed their grievances openly and directly. It was far preferable to gossiping behind their backs. The boy patted the child on the head and told him to stay away. He then began to explain to the man that he was an elf and had come to this country at the invitation of his teacher. He stated that the first thing was this: if they did not like it, let them try to expel him by force. The man, calling him Grander, replied that he shouldn't lose to Grander, but he was too insolent. He promised to show him the meaning of insolence and began clenching his fists, addressing the elf. Consumed with rage, the man began to attack the elf with his fists, insulting him and telling him to go fuck himself. The elf thought that if dwarves had such awkward hands, a normal elf would look very clumsy. But his arms were thick as carrots, and he struck the man. The man, after being struck, looked at the elf. The elf asked him, calling him a dwarf, what the problem was. He declared that their teacher was even stronger than he was to inflict such pain. He then asked if he, a dwarf, would stand up, confirming that he was indeed a dwarf. The man stood up and told him not to underestimate what had happened, emphasizing that this was only the beginning. Inside the house, the man exclaimed that he never ceased to amaze him. He told the elf that if he had called him upon entry before immigrating, there would have been no problems. The man asked the elf what didn't he understand. The elf remained silent, saying only that the compress stunk. The man responded that, at least, it was effective, and he knew what he was planning to do. She said that because of that fight, she invited the elf to this land. Rumors circulate throughout the land, she said, that the elf struck Grander in the forehead. Elsa noted that his wife was young and posed a criminal threat. The man sharply retorted that she shouldn't play games with him. He stated that he was aware of his attempts to divert attention from the fact that she had invited them. He understood that at this time of year he was trying not to tarnish her reputation, and she appreciated that. But then she asked Eisa if she was such a pathetic person that she couldn't care for even one student. At first he remained silent, then asked for forgiveness. The man responded that so much time had passed and he had forgotten how to ask for help. The elf apologized for confusing him. The man simply smiled at him and told him that despite everything, he had succeeded. The man said that the elf who had not lost to the dwarf miner must be the first high elf in the world, and added that he was proud to be his friend. Voices could be heard coming from the door saying that everything was wrong. So no, everything was wrong. The elf screamed loudly that she wasn't a girl, and the other one replied that he didn't have a beard. He expressed his bewilderment, exclaiming that there were only 4 children. He admitted he hadn't known about dwarven children's ability to grow beards, and explained that 20 years, by their standards, was equivalent to about 10 human years. That was their reasoning. He reflected that he never imagined Vin's first fight would be so charming. He concluded that Asvalta must be raising her children without prejudice against elves. He said Vin had become quite brave, if a little stubborn. He then suggested that Eisa move on to discussing the matter. He said he would only briefly outline the details he had received from his mentor. He explained that there were several masters competing with each other, but one dwarf named Rajdor currently led them all. He explained that this was Rajor, an apprentice of Kaushman, a sorcerer and blacksmith. However, he said that Rojar's skill as a blacksmith did not reach the level of a master craftsman. The boy asked what he meant. He said that Ranger had processed the jade. Frill is a rare metal prized by the dwarves above all else and considered a symbol of the king. Its processing requires enormous amounts of heat, and in the entire land there is only one furnace designed for this purpose, the Hidden Treasure Furnace, which only the reigning king can master. The stove is supposed to be heated by a real fire that is located deep underground. Roger, he says, takes on apprentices from dwarves skilled in magic and creates magical tools, which he used to craft mithril without the need for hidden treasures. The elf confirmed that he understood. The man responded by saying that the old-fashioned dwarves had rebelled back then. He warned that if the order took the throne, it could lead to a preference for talented and magically gifted citizens. Magical tools were convenient, but required magical talent to use. Dwarves who only knew blacksmithing were beginning to grow impatient. He said everyone was currently busy working with mithril. The boy asked if he shared the old dwarf's opinion. The man replied in the negative, adding that it was undoubtedly an interesting technology. He declared that this time he did not want to abandon the throne. He explained that there were reasons why he could not give up. He declared that everyone was welcome to come and play. He also wanted to demonstrate to all the dwarves in this country what would happen if dwarves and elves joined forces. He wondered how many friends he had among the students. He wondered what Kaushman would do if he were here. He added that he seemed to have an idea of what kind of magical instrument Rajar had created. He asked if he would fight him. Watching the craftsman at work, he naturally thought his teacher would win. He said Rajdor had carved a spell into the stove. It was also suggested that he was attempting to transform it into a magical instrument. The mage, as was known, had long coveted the dwarven throne. As he and Kaushman delved deeper into the study of magical instruments, he meticulously devised a plan to seize it. To this end, he gathered apprentices with talent for spellcasting. Then the name Rajdor was spoken. After the shout, it was noted that the opponent was a difficult one. He then explained that this was precisely the reason he had invited him. After expressing his gratitude with a laugh, he explained the reason he had invited him: to increase the firepower and create a furnace that could withstand such a load. He said they had an idea of what materials the stove was made of, but they hadn't been able to assemble them yet. He also asked about its firepower. Firepower was mentioned. He then said that they were counting on him and his friend for that. It was acknowledged that the task would be difficult, but no other solution was in sight. The question arose, what if there was a solution? However, he reminded them that it was impossible to regulate the fire's intensity until the kiln was completed. While materials for the stove were being collected, a decision was made to create comfortable conditions for their stay in the land of the gnomes. He said they were going to help Aswald's wife with her shopping, which turned out to be difficult. They also planned to have a drink and chat with Grander. He offered refreshments, which raised eyebrows, and then they called out to him. He stated that to feel more comfortable in a foreign country, it's essential to try as hard as possible to understand the local mentality. Then came the shout. One person asked why the elf's drink was better than his. Another replied that it was because he was the one buying it and called him a moron. Then someone asked what was going on. They explained that this would be their training base and warned him not to expect a warm welcome. When he asked, they replied that everything was fine. He said he just needed to prove himself. Then they would understand and accept him. There was a silent scene which resulted in them demonstratively turning away. He admitted he'd really missed blacksmithing. He then suggested using the material he'd been given. Someone was surprised to ask about iron ore, and it was added that the students wouldn't have enough scrap metal. He was asked if he would make a sword for the boy. Then he asked for a good weapon. He said it was an apology for last time, and then he said goodbye. It was deemed that a trip to the tavern was sufficient. He then called him a good man. Furthermore, he said that Win had mastered the art of swordsmanship at the Kaji dojo. It was decided that a special sword needed to be forged, one that would grow with him and need to be remade over time. He exclaimed how wonderful that was. Then he said that the fire spirit seemed to have taken a very unusual liking to him. He explained that elves generally fear metal and fire, so they avoid blacksmithing and rarely excel at it. In other words, he was a rare elf favored by the spirit of fire. He then noted that Aswald was right. There was an exclamation that was excellent, followed by a call to watch. He assumed his every move was being watched, adding that he was no stranger to such attention, having often found himself at the center of it. He called on everyone to see him, the acknowledged master. He declared it a competition between himself and the dwarves, and he wished for everyone to know about him. It was stated that they would later head to the tavern. About a year later, a strong desire to see the sun was expressed. It was remarked that it was surprising how long gnomes could live underground. The response was a brief agreement. One man asked if they were going sunbathing again. He advised them to be careful and look for holes. When asked about holes, he cited a bear's den as an example. He also remarked that he had almost gotten used to the land of gnomes. The young man reported being kicked out of the training grounds. He was asked where he would train now. His thoughts turned to the dwarves he had met. Then someone said it was no big deal, since he lived a long time. He was offered the chance to find another dwarven land, accompanied by laughter. Then they expressed surprise that he remained sober after 20 mugs of ale. Laughing, he announced that he had been recognized as a true blacksmith. His personal feelings were expressed. At the same time, Win began attending a school attended by dwarven children. When asked if this was him, he answered in the negative, and the name Irene was mentioned. As the master predicted, they gradually adapted to this country. Despite the similar lifespans of elves and dwarfs, the number of dwarves who accepted it increased. Meanwhile, it seemed as if dwarven children were not accepting the wine. He reported that the master's children naturally accepted Win as their comrade, but he had a hard time with the other children. Win, however, not only accepted this fact, but expressed a desire to attend school with them. He said that was why others couldn't resist it, because he reported that Win had chosen the location for his battle on his own. He said he was progressing into adulthood. Every time Win tried to catch up with Shizuki and Mizuho, it was noted. Then there was an exclamation about how cool Win was, yet still so cute. He demanded that she stop hugging him, emphasizing that enough was enough. However, he added that he would soon become an independent man, and then agreed. It happened yesterday. They were asked to go home, which was followed by agreement and a declaration of hunger. They were informed that the materials for the stove, which they had been collecting for a whole year, had finally been found. He mentioned Rab's frog and its skin. He had to engage in combat with an outside mage guild and pose as an adventurer, which was fraught with difficulties. Nevertheless, most of the work was completed, and now the battle with Aswald awaited him. 3 days later, a question was asked about the state of the spirit. It was suggested that she had taken root. He explained that they had spent the last few days finishing work on the oven with the goal of resettling the spirit. He said they say a furnace reflects its owner's character, but in reality, it's about the relationship between the blacksmith and the spirit. He said the spirit of the first furnace loved Aswald so much. Then he was asked about his current location. After a chuckle, he was told it was above his head and that the move hadn't affected his attitude. Then there was a note of confusion, and it was added that he was digging. He said it was mithril. There was surprise, followed by a question about whether it was purified. It was clarified that on Landris, only kings were permitted to do so. It was noted that it was very dangerous. Then came a request not to jump into it. He said mithril is such a hard metal that it's considered a symbol of immutability. It can only be worked with a hot flame, but the temperature must be gradually increased. He said that, in other words, technology is needed to control high heat in stages. One person asked if they were ready to begin. He also said that they needed to work quickly to process effectively. Another responded affirmatively. The man shouted for them to hold on and called for a final push. He noted that he had done them a significant service. Everyone, he said, deserved it, since they had achieved their goal. As noted, blacksmiths have long competed in mithril processing techniques. Asbald significantly surpassed Rajdor in his skill and emerged victorious. He said this battle secured his throne. So at the next fair, they went wild, easily outscoring the other dwarves. But that wasn't enough. Consequently, at the next fair, they showed their best, easily outscoring all the other dwarves. His bearded companion added that, of course, when he and Aswald were able to demonstrate their superiority over everyone else, the young elf declared that he once again realized that the friendship between elves and dwarves was completely untrue. It was suggested that this was only the beginning. By the 5th year, he stated that he, Aswald, and the others had been developing the same idea for several years. He thought it would be a good idea to expand trade routes with Landraz, and then imagined a trading scheme in which humans would trade alcohol with the dwarves who would mine the resources. Then the elves who would grow the plants would trade with the humans. He was ordered to concentrate. He agreed and apologized. It was noted that Wynn had matured both physically and mentally. In training with wooden swords, he beat him 9 times out of 10. It was noted that, thanks to his studies at the dwarven school, he had acquired some knowledge of blacksmithing. Afterward, he approached Aswald with a request to be accepted as an apprentice. He asked why he didn't want to learn from Ace. He replied that he didn't care, but overall he was quite content with Ace's help. Then he asked, puzzled, why? He said that even if Ace trained him, he would never be able to match him, surpass him, or defeat him. He wondered whether Ace loved him or hated him. But he expressed joy at having grown so much. It was just a phase. It was reported that, unexpectedly, disturbing news had arrived. It was then added that the Fordor Empire was preparing to invade the kingdom of Ludoria. He reminded that he had already sealed the route connecting the 2 countries. The elf inquired if there was any error. He was told the information was reliable. A group of dwarven merchants reported that a significant quantity of weapons and provisions had been delivered to the southern cities of the empire. He warned that if the empire managed to overcome the mountains, the Ludrian people would be caught off guard. Such a clash, he noted, could drag on for years, if not decades. One of the characters said that even then the inhabitants of Ludoria and the name Keha was also mentioned. One asked if the other would go. The other answered yes. Then he said he would take care of Wynn. The other said he didn't like it. He thanked him and said he thought he'd be back in a year. He thought about going to the battlefield and leaving Vin behind. On the other hand, if he truly desired peace and tranquility for his loved ones, that day he left the land of the dwarves and, following a group of merchants, headed north with the aim of fulfilling the promise he made to Kazeha. He reported that the route from the land of the dwarves to the empire of Fodal passes through a mountain road that has proven quite difficult to navigate. This, he noted, is Dragon Mountain, and legend claims that dragons dwell here. It was noted that, admittedly, no one had ever seen them here, which was accompanied by a sigh. After that, an exclamation point was raised about dragons. The character recalled that he had previously dismissed the story of the dwarves' theft of fire as a legend until he unexpectedly discovered hidden riches in a dwarven furnace. Now he questions whether this ballad could have had any basis in fact. He mentioned that when he was not yet 100 years old, the elven elders regularly told them stories and performed ballads. It was said that there were only 5 immortal peoples in the world: fairies, who helped maintain balance; dragons, who slept underground and waited for their time; giants, who saw only the heavens; phoenixes, who were reborn after death; and elves, who lived peacefully with the fairies and spent their allotted eternity. The character suddenly made this decision, and the reason turned out to be that the high elf sings so wonderfully, and he looks at it with great attention. So, he noted that this is how we live. and added that it unexpectedly turned out that there are mortal beings who are ready to lend a helping hand to an immortal, and in his case, there are 3 of them. One person expressed the opinion that this was all a lie, and a character asked Ace if he believed in the existence of dragons. One speaker expressed a desire to see dragons if they really existed. Another suggested that if soldiers occupied the mountain, serious problems would arise. Laughter followed, and the remark confirmed this idea, though some disagreed. The character wanted to confirm whether Fodl was indeed planning to attack Rhodolia, and if so, he would move on to the next step. He clarified that the first step in his plan was an investigation, and in the meantime, the food was announced to be ready. The fact was that it was necessary to find another route through the snow-capped mountains, despite the fact that he had already taken all measures to block this road. If the invaders manage to get through the mountains, then they will be awaited on the road to Rhodolia, as agreed. The character suggested that Fodl was likely already aware of the blocked mountain road. He also noted that if it suddenly became clear that other high elves were living in the human lands, he would appreciate the opportunity to communicate with them beforehand. It was noted that Fodl was a land where slavery was legal, and it was also said that the average elves were not able to master the highest level of spiritual arts. The character warned that the price of failure would be very high. Therefore, he expressed hope that their entire journey would prove futile and war could be avoided. Then came agreement and a proposal to rest a bit, and then continue on their way. 3 weeks later, the events moved to the capital of the empire, Fodl. A technique was demonstrated that allows the character to perform magical flight. The character successfully entered and landed. It was also revealed that a group of dwarven merchants were already in the city. He expressed his insane gratitude to them for this thought alone, and explained that they had entered the city a little earlier to look for some inconspicuous shelter for him, at least according to them. He mused that it was something, and it seemed to be a signal from the dwarves. It was added that they would not refuse further information, and since the dwarves were supplying weapons, their position in any military conflict would remain neutral. It was surprisingly noted that there weren't even any locks. He suggested that the other man seemed so drunk that he hadn't noticed. It was also mentioned that, as they had said earlier, it was decided that he would not stay where they did, since the owner of the local trading house was an imperial merchant, and they must not allow him to suddenly find out about its existence. The note reportedly contained the location of the refuge. It was also noted that the dwarves should not think they were trying to stop the war. He thanked them very much for trying to help him, even in such a difficult situation. Furthermore, it turned out that the shelter had been provided by an acquaintance of theirs who was a craftsman. It was noted that supplies were periodically replenished, and they asked to let them know if anything was missing. The character was surprised to find that there was even more than he expected. He suddenly thought that no, perhaps that wasn't really the point, although it was entirely possible that they were trying so hard only because they wanted to get information about what was going on. It was mentioned that Eisa drinks both ale and wine, so it was decided to leave him with both. It was also reported that he enjoys meat. Someone also suggested heating the fireplace, sensing that it would be chilly tonight. Most likely this happened because they mistook him for one of their own. He expressed hope that he would be able to obtain at least some information. He announced that he would begin his investigation from that day on. However, he added that he needed to clarify a few things first. He planned to learn about Fodl's attack and the existence of bypass routes. If there was no attack, he would return home. Otherwise, he would either trust Irene despite the enemy's superiority or seal the passage himself with the elves. He instructed the dwarves to monitor prices and rumors, while he himself would gather information. The character stated that he did not intend to wander freely down the street, as he believed it would attract too much unwanted attention. Then followed his greeting. The character stated that it was at this moment that his loyal friends would be of great use to him, after which he told the group that he completely relied on them. One woman remarked that it was very cold today, while another added that this year's winter had been particularly harsh. Then someone asked if the prices of wheat and grain were rising these days, and one character wondered if his brother would now become an imperial soldier too. The character noted the absence of anything noteworthy in the West. This was followed by his thought about the East, which remained unfinished. One of the characters wondered what the Emperor was thinking. Meanwhile, another reported that they had found the perpetrator of the robbery in the Eastern District and that. Then came the comment that the food situation was not very promising. He said that only private property remained. He also asked for some notes, as a military garrison was indicated on the map. So this went on for 3 weeks. They maintained close contact with the dwarves and exchanged information. As a result, they concluded that preparations for war were indeed underway. One of those present predicted that if food supplies were sufficient, the invasion would likely begin with a melting of the snow. At the same time, a question was asked about updates on the mountain road operation, to which a curt reply was given, stating that there was no news. It was mentioned that the only information available was that the operation was being led by a certain Leon. It was then added that it seemed that was all the information available. It was noted that over the past 3 weeks, regarding the mountain operation, they'd heard only this name from everyone and nothing else. However, despite all this, it seems no one except Leon himself knows for sure who he is. It was alleged that the lords were to blame for the rising prices of goods, but no definitive information was available. One participant in the dialogue expressed doubts. Another said he thought so too, and therefore decided to try to gather some information about Leon. It was mentioned that Leon had arrived in the country only a few years earlier and quickly gained the emperor's favor. Almost immediately after his arrival, rumors of an attack on a neighboring state began to spread throughout the country. He said that naturally, many were unhappy with this man's existence. However, anyone who tried to oppose Leon was immediately excommunicated from the imperial court, and some suffered an even more dire fate. The same thing happened in preparation for the current invasion. General Schlitzen, a confidant and close friend of the emperor, unexpectedly spoke out against it. It was claimed that the cause was Leon's reluctance to share details of the plan to lead his soldiers through the mountain path. The general sharply retorted that heading there without a well-thought-out strategy was dangerous and would only lead to the needless deaths of his soldiers. Even the general managed to secure public support. And then Leon, using the power vested in him, declared the general a rebel and executed him in public. The hero continued his story. His interlocutor, expressing some bewilderment, asked if that wasn't the whole story. He was informed with a deep sigh that such practices were not prohibited here and that they ate the slaves he had purchased. They agreed to meet at the same place a week later, and the other character confirmed this. The first then reflected on the difficulty of judging someone without meeting them in person, concluding that Leon had likely exerted a strong influence on the emperor. The character reflected that in his previous life there had been people in power who had been actively brainwashed, but not through magic. He wondered if he had used special magic, the emperor would have noticed if he had been treated in the same way. The hero felt his head overflowing with a multitude of assumptions, causing him to groan. Furthermore, it was clear to him that without magic, it would be impossible to open the sealed mountain path. He said that, whatever the case, at least he wasn't going to involve the fairies belonging to the captive elves, right? Then came the question of consent. The character thought that if Leon was really involved in all of this, then they would be able to avoid major losses, limiting themselves to only minor casualties. The hero sighed and considered feeding on humans. This elicited a sharp denial from him, and he asked in surprise if it was really true. A week later, he said he'd managed to obtain some information, though it didn't concern Leon. Then he asked what exactly had been discovered. It was mentioned that this was the eldest son of the executed general. This man intends to kill Leon and seize the throne. Eisa's name was mentioned. The character then considered whether he should assist in the plan to eliminate Leon. He also suggested that if they acted carefully and left no evidence, all suspicion would fall on the general's son. He was asked if he was okay, to which he first responded with a question, and then, after a pause, confirmed that he was. He then complained that it was cold here and that his body felt weak. He also mentioned that he had previously lived peacefully among people, attracting almost no attention. The hero noted that all he was currently doing was eavesdropping, deception, and plotting to harm another individual. He also admitted that his heart was completely broken, and he himself felt shattered. After these words, he wondered what would happen next. He wondered what others would think of all this if they knew. The character said that fairies always flew around him, and once upon a time, he thought that was all he needed to be happy. The character wondered why he felt so lonely now. Then he was told they had news which turned out to be bad. They were informed that they had lost contact with 9 of their compatriots living in a city north of the empire. The character responded with a question. They claimed the situation seemed extremely suspicious to them, and they launched an independent investigation. Unfortunately, they learned that the individuals in question had disappeared immediately after their audience with the emperor. Although everyone had seen them enter, no one witnessed them leaving the hall. There's no doubt about it, the emperor himself is involved. And they have more bad news. Some of the dwarves have somehow found out about this. He said that this is why they came to the empire and are trying to negotiate peace, but their patience is wearing thin. Then he added that they are trying to restrain them as best they can. He said it was almost dawn, so they should please go. They promised they'd be nearby and would definitely drop by again. Over the next few days, the character was said to have continued to observe groups of rebels preparing to rebel against Leon. The character noted that with every step he took, the gloomy premonition overcame him more and more. It was said that Leon gained the emperor's trust by promising to restore his long-lost youth. Leon then legalized slavery and set about exterminating anyone who stood in his way. Ultimately, taking advantage of the emperor's decline in years, Leon literally seized the throne. He wondered how that elven ballad had continued. 3 mortal races were able to attain immortal souls. These included evil spirits from the demonic camp, disembodied spirits who rejected the world and saw no meaning in death, and hermits who became nature spirits after their mortal life. He expressed concern that Leon could very well be one of those mentioned. He said that among hermits, very few draw nourishment from the power of nature, striving to harmonize with it. After all, to draw closer to the spirits of nature and be reincarnated, one must spend almost an entire life in patience and rigorous training, torturous for the fragile human body. It was claimed that not all hermits followed the same path. Some chose dark magic. It was also noted that those not closely connected to nature were forced to exert no less effort to attain such power. He said that if they took another person's life, they would be one step closer to immortality. Naturally, fairies disapprove of such actions and will not approach such an individual. At the same time, this will at least relieve the person from anxious thoughts about the finiteness of their life. Hermits of this type are called dark spirits. Among them are vampires, and those who gain energy through lust and debauchery are called succubi or incubi. Creatures that feed on the flesh of others are also called vampires. The acquired life energy can even be shared with another person, although this carries a certain risk. The character suggested that this is quite likely how Leon helps the Emperor regain his youth. The character expressed regret for not taking the Elder's stories seriously from the start, even though those stories were perhaps even older than the storytellers themselves. If Leon truly is a dark spirit, he should have no problem crossing the mountains in no more than 1,000 steps. The hero noted that he now understood the vampire's desire for war. He said that if Leon managed to untie her, they would be able to find a considerable number of fresh bodies to feed on. The character added that over the course of his long life, many dear and very important people had come to surround him. The character stated that he must kill Leon. The character expressed the belief that getting rid of him any other way would be extremely difficult, so he would simply kill him, regardless of the consequences. The character stated that he was ready to do even this for the sake of his loved ones. It was claimed that Leon, who turned out to be a vampire, was the root cause of their misfortunes. They then decided to eliminate him to stop the war and prevent many casualties. This was followed by a question expressing understanding. The next day, he planned to leave the city and head for the capital. He was certain that Leon wouldn't emerge from the palace in such a severe snowstorm. His current plan was to travel to the capital, eliminate Leon, and return immediately. One person confirmed that he understood everything. Afterward, they announced their intention to go with him, which infuriated the character, who forbade them from even considering it. He was asked if he realized the threat was specifically aimed at their people, and that this was akin to voluntarily accepting certain death. The dwarves then explained that while they were known to be engaged in trade, transporting and selling goods was not, in fact, their primary activity. He said they serve as a kind of bridge between their relatives living among humans and those who remained in their homeland. Essentially, maintaining communication between them is their primary purpose. As they already mentioned, contact with 9 of them had been lost. If they were truly dead, they were obligated to immediately gather the remaining goods and return home. As they already mentioned, contact with 9 of them had been lost. And if they were truly dead, then they were obligated to immediately gather the remaining goods and return home. 2 weeks later, the events moved to the imperial city of Daglia. The character noted that the dwarves had made a mat for him, but apparently he wouldn't need it. It was claimed that Leon's aura was so noticeable that it would allow him to locate Leon without much effort. He thought the aura that enveloped the streets reeked of madness and rot, making even the mine-polluted rivers seem beautiful in comparison. And only one person here fits that description. He expressed regret that if he had the opportunity, he would simply blow up any place where he found the smell. The hero decided that this could not be done because innocent people could get hurt. He considered whether he was truly so cruel by nature. Then he wondered if Kaihea would be angry when she found out, and whether he posed a danger to her. The hero noted that, on the other hand, his actions were dictated not by personal interests, but by the good of the entire elven people. He also suggested that the elves would hardly forgive him for all his actions. The character began a thoughtful sentence. The character stated that he had not belonged to the human race for a long time and had nothing in common with people. He also wondered if he had lost all human qualities within himself. Leon's mansion was surprisingly noted to be enormous. The character thought that perhaps all the aristocrats envied him. He said that given its size, there were probably a ton of servants here, but he couldn't sense their auras. The character thought that perhaps, if he were human, he wouldn't be able to sense such things at all, and it even felt strange to say so now. The character determined that the source of Leon's aura send was located in this very place. The arrow hit the young man straight. The character remarked that this was very reckless of him. He then mentioned the poison arrow with which he easily pierced the strongest monsters. The character decided to try to defeat the enemy with the element of wind, summoning the wind fairies. His opponent, in turn, expressed surprise, asking if he was trying to defeat gold with wood. After this, the hero noted that his attack had been dispelled. The young man hit the guy with his nails, and another one was stabbed by a sword and fell from the balcony to the ground. He believed the vampire possessed the art of deflecting the elements. The character realized he was powerless to resist. He had hoped to combat him using the powers of the fairies, but now he recognized his own weakness. The hero mentioned that fairies were assisting him, that he was skilled with a bow and sword, and that he also possessed magical abilities. However, despite this, he came to the conclusion that he would not be able to defeat the enemy using conventional methods. One person noted the character's exceptional persistence. At the same time, the hero reflected that it wasn't Leon himself who was evil. He said that evil was the creature that lived within him, and he was certain of it. However, some foolish elf challenged him, and the character himself thought that no allies, no kin, no one would help him now. A threat was made. Let him fear, feel despair, and tremble with terror, seeing his power. And the character himself, at that moment, thought that he alone simply wanted to protect someone close to him. Someone asked if he was trying to escape. The second character, uncomfortable, let out a short groan and then added that he was wasting his time. He said the spell was quite powerful, and it would be a good idea to practice with it. But it was very difficult to hit a living creature, since its effect depended on where it was cast. One of the characters inquired as to what was going on. The other was confused, and it was decided that they needed to try to direct the spell in the right direction. Threats of murder and total annihilation were made. One of the characters expressed gratitude to Kashman, noting that his lessons had been very useful, and grinned and chuckled. It was mentioned that Kaya once, and then it was stated that he lacked fighting spirit. The elf claimed that the other was capable of combining all the key qualities, soul, body, and skill. It was claimed that from now on there would be nothing he couldn't handle, and he was cut in half. Surprise was expressed at how well sharpened the blade was. The character added that it was all thanks to Icewold, who forged it for him. The character paused, expressing surprise that he couldn't kill him even after quartering him. After that, he decided to try again. After the incident, he tried to escape before the guards found the body and immediately headed to the dwarves' hideout. There, they offered him alcohol and rags, causing him to react with surprise and refusal. He also reflected. He was asked to remain silent. Due to poor treatment, the wounds on his stomach had festered, but even the extreme treatment worked, though the pain was excruciating. He was unconscious for 10 days, but when he awoke, he received information from the dwarves that was difficult to describe. He said that immediately after Leon's murder, a search for those responsible was launched, but it ended as quickly as it began. Of course, the aristocracy had a hand in this, and they all hated Leon, but he said that it turned out the emperor had been struck down by an incurable disease and had therefore decided to pass the throne to his son. And just then, they showed up, asking for the release of their relatives. Fortunately, the young emperor agreed to receive them. It was claimed he said it was all Leon's doing, having already paid the price for his sins. It turned out that, apparently, all the information they'd learned was true. The character uttered a relieved, "Thank God," that now it's certain. It was claimed that the incurable disease was actually vampire hunger. Having regained his youth with Leon's help and then lost his patron, the former emperor began devouring innocent people. Naturally, the new government sought to conceal the true reason for the former ruler's imprisonment from the people. He said the new emperor couldn't ignore the dwarf situation either and soon pardoned them. The dwarves appreciated this noble gesture, in their own way. The character added that at least they had managed to stop the war. And then, a few days ago, the character reported that he had managed to eliminate the former emperor who was suffering from vampire hunger. He said that for ordinary people, his death was nothing surprising. Anyone would have died if he'd spent a week locked up in such cold. He went on to note that had he not taken this step, he might have continued devouring other people's flesh and youth. And this might be discovered later when someone discovered his body. The hero reflected that investigations would likely begin. Questions about who killed him and where he had fled. He also assumed that a large number of people would come under suspicion. Those days were said to have been truly captivating. The hero expressed a desire that if he had the opportunity to visit the Feudal Empire again, he would want to leisurely and openly enjoy the country's grandeur. However, for now, he longed to meet the others as soon as possible. It is said that at the moment of the world's creation, the creators created fairies to maintain harmony. They gave birth to 4 different beings, endowing them with consciousness and will, and the creators created the High Elves. Then giants appeared in the clouds, blocking the sun with their majesty. It is said that phoenixes, immortal birds, and dragons became protectors. The creators, pleased with their work, decided to create others like themselves to fulfill their duties. Having created them, they fell into a deep sleep. Thanks to the deities, the elves and their complete opposite, the dwarves, emerged. Then came humans, the most numerous race, and the beastmen, created to compensate for their weakness. It is said that where progress arose, discord arose, and each god placed his own creation above the others. During these disputes, magic emerged from which monsters were born. The more intense the disputes became, the more hostile their creations became. So the deities decided to make peace and build a new world where they could live in harmony. They entered into an agreement prohibiting uncontrolled interference in the lives of beings. The young man finished telling the legend of the divine creation of the world and remarked that their board game was based on this mythology. The boy suggested that elves and dwarves were very similar since they appeared at the same time. He confirmed that they even thought alike. The boy asked if they were now considered dwarves. The man replied that it was a matter of individual self-perception. It was said that after the story with the kingdom of folk ended, they received citizenship with the monarch's approval. The hero boasted that he had earned access to the royal copper reserves. He noted that he couldn't recall any instances of outsiders being recognized as equals to the dwarves and granted citizenship. He considered receiving citizenship a significant achievement, recalling how happy everyone had been for them. He then mentioned the rumor that the king would soon hand over the throne to his children. He thought that citizenship in this country was valuable to him in itself, and he assumed that when Einswold became king, he already had an heir in mind. Eisa noticed that the king was currently more concerned with cultural exchange with other races than with his heirs. The boy said he had seen him writing a letter and asked to whom, to which he replied, "To Arena." It said that until recently, trading with the dwarves seemed like a fairy tale, but now it's become a reality. He thinks it would be better if dwarves and elves resolve matters through intermediaries, although humans can sometimes be selfish. And he realized he had no understanding of prices. The young man remembered how she'd bought the kukri and hoped she'd agree to cooperate. The boy said he too wanted to see Arena and hoped for a quick response. The hero realized that he had lost and was surprised by this and thought that Vin had become too strong. The guy suggested they practice swords after that, and he agreed. He asked if he could practice. He noted that his skills had noticeably improved, and he had completely stopped winning. Eisa apologized. Vin said there was no need to feel sorry for him. It would motivate him to try harder and he would definitely win someday. It was reported that 18 years had passed since their first meeting. He noted that he was actually 24, but to people he looked like he was 12. He explained that Vin was just beginning to learn blacksmithing. The master believed he had talent and was a quick learner, mastering the furnace almost immediately. The hero thought the boy was increasingly withdrawing from his care, perhaps due to growing up. The master advised him to simply keep an eye on him from a distance, saying that at his age, this was normal. And he remembered how he himself, at 150 or 15 in human terms, had fled the village. And he looked at the photo and thought that soon Vin would be all grown up. He was glad to see him changing, but he wanted to cuddle him a little longer, and he thought he'd certainly get angry and say he wasn't a child anymore if he mentioned it. Eisa thought that maybe relationships between people are a complicated thing and thought that maybe it's only hard now, and then he will remember it with a smile. Someone called the protagonist and said they had guests. An elderly man greeted him. He said it was another letter from that elf girl. Ace thanked him and said it was on his way anyway, thinking it wasn't the first time he'd given him a letter from Irena. The guy read that she managed to talk to the elves living among people and reported that most of them reacted extremely negatively. She wrote that many people were interested, elves from the guild and forest dwellers. She added that she was now a member of the Rudolian elfin community, 6 of whom were there, and they planned to naturalize here. And he thought the adventuring elves were interested in supplying weapons even though their acquaintance hadn't worked out. If all went well, they'd be able to establish supplies to the forest. He thought that Arena was already preparing to leave Rudolia, and that's what it means to have an heir. The protagonist wondered how much longer Cleus and Maritane had left, since their lifespans were short, as humans don't live very long. He imagined that they were raising their heirs and rejoicing in their successes, just as he was now. He mentally remarked that there were still tensions in the relationship between the dwarves and the elves, but he trusted Irene because she knew how to choose the right people. And he thought that if he hadn't met her that day, his life would have been different. Eisa admitted to himself that if it weren't for her, he wouldn't be who he is. He added that he trusted her as much as he trusted himself. The guy asked Vin to run to the master as he had one request. He explained that he needed permission to enter the dwarven land for several people. He said they needed to prepare as they would soon have very busy days since the dwarves had never received so many elves. The young man thought that ever since they arrived they were always in the thick of things. 2 months later, the letter still hadn't arrived, and he complained about the wait. He also said he really needed a bath. The master remembered he had one at home. He said there was a real banya here, but he wanted a varnished one with boiling water, and there weren't any here. He asked how far the northern volcano was, where boiling water gushes out of the ground like a fountain at the foot of it. The man said he'd heard of it, but there were monsters there. The master was horrified that he was willing to fraternize with monsters just to get into boiling water. The young man asked what was wrong with him if he'd thought about it. Eisa said he wasn't serious and wouldn't do something like that. It would be better to ask the fairies to dig a spot for a bathhouse there. He said he'd take Vin along. It would be fun. The man resolutely declared that if that was the case, then he would go too. The protagonist tried to dissuade him, saying he was the king and that it was dangerous and full of monsters. The man laughed and said that since he was taking Vin with him, it must be safe enough. Elf admitted that he didn't think that a spontaneous idea would suddenly turn into a serious project. A week later, they arrived at the site and Vin noticed a strange smell. He reflected that he hadn't realized such a crowd would gather and that he'd originally planned to invite only Ainswold and the warriors. Suddenly their number increased to 50. There were warriors, even merchants came. The entire family of the master and grand also came. He was surprised that even the carpenters came. The man said it was their way of thanking him for everything he'd done. Eisa asked him not to fool him and said it was his fault there were so many people there. He replied that he shouldn't have fun alone. Vin caught the warriors' attention and announced that there was a monster masquerading as a rock ahead. He offered to go ahead and show them. One of the warriors said 3 should be enough to take on a monster with such camouflage, while another reminded them that little Vin would be with them. The protagonist thought he'd make a good scout. He had a real gift. He decided that this time he would allow himself to focus on finding a suitable swimming spot. He noted that the dwarves also trusted Vin's skills, since they were willing to follow him. The guy shouted that he was going, and the other one thought that he was incredibly worried about him. But overprotection would not lead to anything good. The warriors told him he could be proud of his son, as he had behaved very bravely. He was delighted and asked for more details, praising Vin. Eisa believes that when he told him about what happened and all the details, the boy was very happy and thought that seeing him smile made him feel happy too. A few weeks later, he saw the structure and thought it was no longer a bathhouse, but a fortress. It turned out the soldiers had planned to establish a garrison and had no intention of giving up the site for a resort. However, he thought they had managed to take the baths for themselves after all. However, they later had to be divided into male and female baths for Ainswold's wives. The hero thought that sometime later the gnomes even organized a tour to the hot springs, and in a short time they elevated it to the rank of a cultural heritage. He thought he should soon receive a reply from Irina, and he told the fairies that the hot springs reminded him of themselves, just as strong and eternally youthful, and just as numerous. He decided that when the girl and the others arrived, he would take them to the baths. He was sure they would be delighted. The guy thought that, as it turned out, gnomes, like elves, like hot springs. The young man decided to prepare for her arrival, as they would soon meet, and he thought they would be together again. 2 months later, the elven retinue reached the land of the dwarves. They greeted Lord Ainswold and Lord Ace. The guests beamed with joy, delighted to see them again. The master dwarf noted that 30 years had passed since their last meeting. He was pleased to see that the girl still carefully guarded the kukri he forged. The girl admitted that she was initially surprised and didn't expect a warm welcome, given the discord between the races. But she noted that the dwarves received their arrival very calmly and warmly. The man said it was because of Eisa. He comes here every day, so everyone's gotten used to him. The young man modestly retorted that not everyone liked him, but he was glad the dwarves had at least stopped fearing him. She introduced her 3 adventurer friends, naming them Celta, Tremum, and Kuru. She added that they were currently traveling through Rhodolia. She then introduced Hules, a wandering bard. He explained that he had recently visited Verstoric and several surrounding states. Finally, she introduced Lewis, saying she was an artist. The girl was visibly nervous. Lewis apologized and introduced herself as an artist. She explained that she usually paints portraits of aristocrats to order, but her true passion is landscape painting. She admired their good fortune to live in such a magnificent country and said she couldn't wait to sketch the local beauty. The gnome invited them to stay with him to get used to life here. It is said that the elves adapted surprisingly quickly to local society. In the tavern, the bard thanked everyone and announced that the next song he would be performing for the first time was dedicated to an ancient legend about a dwarf. He added that it was based on a story the blacksmiths had told him. Eisa thought it had all happened too quickly, and it infuriated him that the dwarves hadn't even greeted him at first. Meanwhile, Lewis was drawing, delighting the local children. The girl asked to draw her grandmother, and the artist happily agreed. It's reported that once she won the children's hearts, parents and even the elderly joined in. The girl's work was so popular with residents that entire families lined up to see her. It's said that the elven seekers also settled in quite well, starting to hunt and patrol, competing with the locals. The resentment and hatred that usually accompanied encounters between elves and dwarves suddenly vanished, and the negativity vanished with the arrival of their leader, Irina. Eisa met with her to discuss joint trade. She conveyed a message from the forest elders who promised to do everything they could to improve the situation should he so desire. She emphasized that this was a message of deep gratitude. The protagonist remembered that many freed servants lived in the Mai Forest and that Vin was born there, and he thought about gratitude, believing that Irina had done most of the work. He was terrified that they would take the boy in and raise him, and he feared Vin would return. She laughed and said the elders had meant something different. The girl explained that if he hadn't intervened, a fight could have broken out, in which innocent people would have suffered. Therefore, they were extremely grateful that with his help they had avoided that. Eisa realized that some people took this situation much more seriously than he thought. The young man agreed and replied that he would be happy to accept the offer if they could truly help. Irena said they would have plenty to talk about. She also mentioned that the first batch of homemade fruit cider is already in production for export. However, there's a problem with importing weapons as elves hate metal. The girl said that elves only recognize magical weapons, and dwarves are unlikely to make anything that isn't metal. The protagonist explained that dwarves are too proud of their metalworking achievements to take on anything else. He suggested dividing the responsibilities between the elves and the dwarves to keep everyone happy. Irena called it a great idea, and they began to plan who would be responsible. She, taking notes, happily said that they were able to get at least a little closer to the final goal. It is said that from now on there are no barriers between the land of the dwarves and the elven forest, and that all that remains is to overcome the psychological barrier. It is reported that, as long as they follow a common goal, this barrier will soon be broken. Someone said that we should raise our glasses to our friends who have come here from far away. Eisa asked if they were tired of listening to these songs. The master replied that he should let her sing, because it was so heartwarming. Lewis said he tolerated alcohol well and offered him another drink. He replied that he often encountered gnomes, so he was used to it. He asked why she was so happy and if something had happened. The artist said she was very glad she decided to come here, and he remembered something she once told him. He added that she had said that her opportunities as an artist were severely limited geographically. Far from the country where everyone knew and appreciated her, it was practically impossible to earn money. He said he could go anywhere. Eisa recalled that in her work she was more often asked to paint portraits on commission than landscapes. And she mentioned that she would like to paint a boat. She said that she had recently spoken with Hules and they were planning to organize something like an elven caravan, and we would travel on it together. The protagonist said it sounded very good. The girl asked him what he thought and if he would come with us. But the guy declined, saying he had important things to do. Lewis said she would teach him to draw and Hules to sing. The young man thought that his former self would have agreed to go without hesitation. He decided to do it later when he'd sorted out the time and other matters and didn't finish. The girl asked if the artist had fallen asleep. Eisa thinks that maybe he was being selfish by inviting a group of elves here just to see everyone. Or maybe it's good to get together sometimes. And he offered to take everyone back. Irena said she would be very happy. It was reported that 3 years had passed since the elves left the land of the dwarves, and almost 11 years since he and Vin first set foot on these lands. Trade was now improving between the elves and the dwarves. The hero asked if he could take a moment's break. The man asked what he needed. He was reportedly one of the blacksmiths who crafted weapons for import to the elves. The young man said he'd lost to him many times at blacksmithing fairs. That's where they met, and he volunteered to help develop trade relations between the two peoples. He noted that this was precisely why he was now one of the most important figures in the development of trade relations. He then said there was another dwarf who wanted to forge weapons to order. He asked who it was. The boy replied that it was Rajol. He was said to be the teacher of Koshmin, who lost to Ainswald in the Battle Royale due to improper processing of mithril. Eisa admitted that at first he had thought he was a power-obsessed eccentric. He said he would be a great help, even though working with anything other than metal might seem boring. The man asked if he could use magic and received an affirmative answer. He explained that he had heard that elves and fairies could communicate and wield magic, which meant they had talents. The protagonist believes that among the elves there are many masters capable of creating magical weapons. And when Rajal gave him a design, he took it as a challenge and decided to bring it to life. It later turned out that he was a master at this. The boy was surprised why he suddenly remembered Ainswold and Wynn, assuming they behaved similarly. The dwarf asked me to tell Rajal that he'd be happy to chat with him. Eisa also recalled that he'd recently been approached by a group of merchants with whom he'd previously traveled to Fadl. They reported that trade was slow and they needed work. The merchants are reportedly still trying to maintain contact with the dwarves outside their homeland. However, this time they have expressed a desire to participate in the development of relations between the races. The men are thinking about mead and think they need to get more of it. It is said that relations between the two nations have improved markedly since Ainswald became the king of the dwarves. Eisa believed Vin's blacksmithing training was complete. He'd gained experience and learned how to run a business. He figured he'd accomplished everything he wanted to here, so he hoped for understanding. He announced to Vin that they were returning to Rudolia, and he remembered that he promised Kaya he'd look after her until his last breath, and that he thought they'd spend at least 10 years there together. He also said they were leaving in a week. Vin turned away and briefly replied that he understood and would prepare to leave. The protagonist thought that it was unknown what the boy was really thinking, and it was possible that deep down he wanted to stay here forever. As they parted, Ace thanked the dwarf for his concern. Suddenly, the dwarf tossed them a parting gift. and the young man realized with surprise that it was a bracelet. The young man, shocked, asked if it was made of mithril, as they valued things so highly. The dwarf reassured him, saying he'd asked permission to use the royal furnace, so it wasn't contraband. He explained that thanks to these bracelets, any dwarf in the world would immediately recognize them as fellow gnomes. The hero hesitated, wondering if he couldn't just leave silently. The boy tearfully said that he could not accept the gift, since unlike Eisa, he had not done anything special for them. The dwarf punched him in the head and called him stupid. He added that he was first and foremost his student and their brother. He also declared that Vin was far better than this big-eared fool and ordered them not to even compare. The hero took offense, realizing he'd just been called a stupid elf, and promised to remember. The boy, however, burst into tears even more. The master said that Eisa was an excellent father, and he certainly had something to compare him to. Therefore, they could entrust the boy's care to him without a twinge of conscience. And he said he wasn't just a free bonus to his father. The man added that everyone knew about it, inviting him to stop by. He told him not to give up his blacksmithing and asked if he understood. The young man thought he'd never considered Vin considering himself a free bonus before. He realized he'd been oblivious to it all this time, and he decided that the most important thing for him was the boy's feelings and what he was thinking about. He thought that if he pondered Einswald's words, he might be able to understand the child a little. The dwarf thanked him for his help. The dwarf said that the next time they saw each other, he would officially be king. Eisa added that such a spectacle was worth coming back for another laugh. It's reported that when they first arrived, Vin couldn't walk properly, and now he's leaving this place on his own. And once again, they're heading for Rudolia. It's reported to be the capital of the kingdom of Rudolia. Life in the human city is different from that of the dwarves. The butcher's shopkeeper has changed. A completely different man now stands in his place. Vin notices this, his face visibly saddened. Someone holding a child exclaimed that they had arrived, surprised by their arrival. The woman greeted them and said that they knew that guests were already on their way. The young man was surprised by their knowledge. The man explained that they had received a letter, but since it hadn't indicated a date, they had waited patiently until Mother announced their arrival today. She said that they were already close and suggested waiting at the gate, because on that very day the wind suddenly changed. The main character noticed that they had noticeably increased the number of students. The man said that since the family business passed into his hands, things have improved and now they have more than 100 students. The elf recognized the Usogi style, one of the 4 main martial styles of the kingdom. The boy asked Shizuki to take him on as an apprentice. He agreed and replied that children were welcome too. Eisa asked the boy to take his time, as they had just arrived and hadn't yet had time to distribute the gifts. Vin said he had gotten stronger. The woman giggled, noticing how much the boy had matured. She invited him to have tea with her, saying she would be happy to hear about his adventures in the land of the gnomes. He agreed. He thought, seeing Vin with the children, that he was trying so desperately to grow up and, apparently, was genuinely worried about him. And he decided that at this rate he would soon leave home and want to live on his own since he was already quite grown up. The woman invited him to come with her. The protagonist listed his adventures, mithril vampire, trading with elves. His interlocutor said it sounded incredible and that he was a master storyteller, and confirmed that she believed him. She noted that she especially believed the story about the hot springs. She thought there were no such places anywhere except in the east where the Yosogi came from. The young man said it was very nice there. The woman said there were so many stories and she wanted to know more about them all, but suggested starting with something simpler. It seemed Vin had managed to get the better of him. At least, that's what he thought. Eisa became embarrassed, saying he didn't understand what she meant, and stated that he was just happy to watch him grow up. She said she, too, was happy to see Shizuki grow older and had easily yielded the family business to him. However, she had no intention of giving in to him in a fight, as he was still too young to defeat her. The elf admitted that everything was much more complicated, and he even felt somehow ashamed. And he admitted that, although he was happy about his success, he was pained by the realization that the hour of separation was approaching. He said he realized this more and more clearly with each passing day, which is why he was so resistant and didn't want to lose to Vin, and he thought his face showed it all since she understood everything. The boy said he was completely confused. The woman consoled him, patting him on the back and telling him that what he was experiencing was completely normal for every parent. Kaiha explained that Shizuki continued the business and stayed by her side, while Mizuha went off to travel with her family, and she accepted her choice. She added that she sometimes missed her daughter, but at the same time, she was happy, and that was normal. She assumed Eisa felt the same, and she suggested a little sparring. The elf was surprised by the proposal. She offered to train him for 3 years, and her son would take care of the boy's preparation. After 3 years, they would hold a competition. They would be against Shizuka and Vin. The woman said they recognized the right to independence. But that's not enough. They need to be shown that they can do it and that they're not as easily defeated as they think. Keha believed that Vin, though an independent boy, was still weak in swordsmanship and still had a lot of learning to do. So Eisa could rest for now. He laughed and agreed that she was right. The final duel is reportedly scheduled for 3 years from now, and both Shizuki and Vin have accepted the challenge. The boy is now 23 years old, which would be 16 or 17 in human years. And I have almost come to terms with this, feeling calm for him. The hero thought that perhaps he had not spent enough time with him, and that perhaps all parents felt something similar. Eisa remembered thinking a lot about how he had never fully adjusted to being a parent and thought, as he had told Vin, that from now on he was his best friend and protector. The boy thought that a parent is someone a child looks up to, whose approval they seek, and whose actions they imitate. And he had only become half that parent so far. The elf feels like he's been through a lot lately, including meeting someone he saw for the first time in a long time. And he thought that he had accumulated quite a few stories that were far from human understanding. And for Vin, who was struggling to keep up with him. The protagonist remembered that they had walked this entire path together, and he thought that, in some way, he owed her something. The boy called out to him, saying he'd been trying to get through for the 100th time. Eisa apologized and asked what had happened. He complained that no one was saying anything concrete about the training Kaiheha was conducting, only harping on about some secret. He hadn't heard any blows or the clash of swords, and he asked to be told everything. And he replied that she was teaching him something. The woman said he was very good at understanding people, and he agreed, saying he learned it while hunting. She asked him to forget all about it. Keihan instructed him, saying that the body, heart, and blade must be in harmony. She added that it was important to know when and where to strike, without being distracted by other things. She also asked if he was not going to take up arms until he felt ready. Eisa said he shouldn't swing a sword unless he's in shape. The woman reminded him that he should focus on victory. He could swing the weapon as much as he wanted, but victory would only come with preparation. And she called him an unbearable, stubborn egoist because she says the same thing and he ignores everything. And she said that while he was traveling, she trained a lot. She declared that her training had paid off, and she would be able to parry his blow even if he tried to catch her off guard. She ordered him to take up his sword and imitate her. He asked what could be better for a student than to imitate the teacher, noting that it was effective. She then told him to watch closely to see in her the Kaya he admired. The boy asked if she was revealing the secrets of the Ushogi style to him. The hero replied that she was, and that she had made an exception for him. Vin asked if Shizuki had mastered these secret arts, thinking it was cool. Eisa replied that, unfortunately, no. His mother hadn't taught him that. He explained that the man knew perfectly well how to hold a sword and didn't think he needed to delve into the finer points. The boy asked what they actually did during training. The elf said she was waving her sword and he was trying to imitate her empty-handed. Vin guessed that was why he couldn't hear anything. The young man complained that his muscles were aching, probably because he had not yet mastered the movements. Vin thought that Kaya was cool and that he had something to strive for. The hero thinks she expected it would take 3 years to reach her level. In reality, it will take dozens. So difficult is this art. He thought that someday the moment would come when they would meet face to face as equals, and then this stage would pass, and he and Vin would return to their normal lives. Eisa suggested the boy go back, and thought he was curious about what kind of swordsman he'd be in 3 years. It's revealed to be the town of Wistakort 2 years later. The girl joyfully greets her mother and Eisa, remarking how happy she is to see them. The hero thanks Mizerha for looking after their house. The guy says he will join later because she needs to see someone. The elf says that he received a letter from Wistakort and decided to go there. And he adds, to visit the graves of 2 adventurers dear to him. Claius passed away 2 months ago and Martina followed him. And he reflects on how fragile people really are. Someone calls out to Asa. The young man thanks her for the letter. She replies that you are welcome. The protagonist thinks that they were always surrounded by many friends and acquaintances. But in 100 years no one will remember them, and they will simply become nobody, and only Arena will never forget them. She remembers how Martina told her before the end that the 4 of them didn't get along very well, but that Claius and Martina had responded to Keihi's call at the time, only thanks to Arena. The girl says thank you and admits that if there had not been someone next to her who could share the burden of an elf with eternal life, she would have meekly followed them. And she says the realization that they've ended their lives and will never return to the city is painful. Even after hundreds of years, she won't have the courage to admit to herself that they're no longer around. And no matter how many times she returns, only 2 cold graves will await her. Arain cries and says that if she could run away from this, maybe she wouldn't be so sad. Eisa hugs her and says that, unlike them, they still have a lot of time to think things through. He thinks he doesn't know how much time will have to pass. 10 years or 100 before she stops worrying so much. And then perhaps she'll find the strength to forget such memories. And I'll be able to remember their friends with a smile. Through tears, the girl says she's very glad she was with them all this time. The guy thinks that the pain that Arena is now experiencing will inevitably overtake him in the near future. The elf reported that it seemed to be here. It intended to come yesterday, but the journey had taken longer than he'd thought, and Mizuha had stopped him this morning. And he remembered her words about how proper parenting is all about affection, and how you should hug your child more often. Which, frankly, he didn't see much point in. He also thought wryly that perhaps it would have been better to bring ale instead of flowers. The main character said that he really misses Rotten. Mizuha was looking after the house he'd chosen for him. He added that she'd recently abandoned her career as an adventurer and taken up teaching, just like Cleus. The young man reported that the child Cleus and Martina, now a knight in Zane's, reflected that he regretted not having been able to meet him. He added that the city evoked a feeling of nostalgia. But his heart told him it was no longer his home, and he thought with sadness that everyone he knew now lives only in his memory. The woman asked if he was finished. He replied that he probably was, and he managed to say goodbye properly. The man asked for silence and announced that the fight would begin soon. Eisa thought that his opponent was very fast, and if this continued, he would lose. He mused that he had caught him off guard by using a versatile oblique thrust that could be used in any stance, and he remembered how Kaya had tested it on him during training. Before he could even react, she was already beating him, and it was very offensive. The protagonist noted that 3 years ago he was completely different. Under the master's guidance, the boy matured and became noticeably stronger. In his memories, the woman said that if Vin was truly dear to him, he had to win. She told him to make the boy see him as an ideal to aspire to and to treat him the same way she treated him. He thought her instructions had rekindled his interest at that moment, and he thought that this was precisely why he would never lose to him. It was announced that Eisa was the winner. The boy said that after completing his training, he was going to travel to the west. He replied that he knew there was a struggle going on there between humans and beastmen, and that they were also at odds with the other races. He said he'd have it even worse there, since he was only half-elf, meaning everyone around him was his enemy. He added that he understood that he'd tried his best to protect him from adversity and danger until now, but he asked for his understanding. Vin said he felt he had to stop him, otherwise he would inevitably get into trouble and end his life because he wasn't a pure-blooded high elf. Eisa suggested they talk about it when he was a little older, and Vin promised to be careful. The young man said that after all, he must someday know what it was like to be born different from all the other members of his race and to experience grief. The elf asked him for only one thing, to take care of his life. He worriedly assumed there were elves, beastmen, and humans there. They would defeat him. Vin replied that he'd entered Hyperopega and everything would be fine. He explained that he wasn't aiming to end his life there. He simply wanted to travel, see the world with his own eyes, and become stronger. The boy added with a smile that when he returned, they would fight again, and who knows, maybe then he would even be able to defeat his own father. Then he became embarrassed, saying that it was somehow shameful. Ben asked if his father was crying, to which he replied that he was not. He told him not to worry, as he was a crybaby himself, and he thought with a smile how much alike they were. Eisa thought that his boy had finally become a real man. He thought that many difficulties awaited him on the way, and he would no longer be there to help and support him at that moment. The elf added that they would definitely find a way to survive all the hardships, and that one day he would return home and tell of all his adventures. He also said that he was crying, but the boy denied it. It is reported that a year has passed since Vin set out on his journey, and 6 years since he returned to the Yosogi clan. By this time, he had taken several apprentices into his forge. He also shared that one man was the reason for this. He asked Eisa if he would leave too, as it would be a shame to waste such beauty. He also suggested selecting the most skilled among the boys and teaching them how to use a forge. The boy asked him for a hug. He thought he was so cute, and even though Shizuki knew full well he'd leave them sooner or later, he still agreed to take on the students. But a problem arose. Sua also expressed a desire to learn blacksmithing. Everyone was surprised, as she was the eldest daughter of the Yosogi family and the leading contender for the future role of clan head, which threatened a major scandal. The man said that if this is what she wants, then there is nothing to discuss. The woman told Ace that becoming the clan leader wasn't the same as the meaning of life, and she wasn't forced to follow only one path. Besides, blacksmithing would strengthen her spirit and body. She also jokingly asked him not to fool her granddaughter, Soha herself, if she really wanted this. He said he'd been observing her for several days and that she really did have talent. However, there are many other activities besides blacksmithing, such as sword fighting, and there are other options in general. The girl declared that Togi would inherit the clan, following in his father's footsteps and becoming a fine swordsman. She would become a blacksmith, but would still occasionally help her brother with clan affairs, since she was his older sister. It was reported that it was already the 13th year since he returned to the clan. He brought Kaihei a twig. She replied that it would be soon, very soon. And he said that if she was smart, she would definitely live another 3 years. The woman said that 3 years was quite a long time. She said that he had already had enough of her, and it was time for her to finally let him go free. And she asked him to give him that bowl. Keha, having tasted the apua fruits, said that they were indeed delicious. Then she told Eisa to take the sword, and she said that this was her sword, Kehi's sword, Yosoki, in all its glory. It is said that this is the highest skill that nothing can compare to. The woman said she hoped he was looking at her closely and admitted that she loved him. Sometime later, after the funeral, he left the clan. Everyone desperately tried to dissuade him, but he remained adamant, feeling that this was not the place for him to be. The letter said that she knew he would mourn her, so she decided to keep this letter as a keepsake. She wrote that she had always loved him and therefore asked him to remember her until this letter was lost. But she doesn't ask to remember her for the rest of her life, knowing that his life is long and therefore she can't ask him for such a thing. She'll be happy if he finds even a little time to remember her. And she promised that if he ever forgot about her, and even when his hands could no longer hold a sword, she would still protect him. Every time he picked up a sword, he should know that she was near. The woman wrote to him that her sword would guide him on this path of life, and asked him to keep it if he did read this letter to the inn. He decided that from now on his path would lie to the east, to where the Yosogi fighting style had originated, and as soon as he had collected enough stories about his adventures, he would return. And he will sit down at Kaihi's grave and tell her everything. In the wagon, they asked Eisa how he was. He replied that he was much better now, but he was once again convinced that he couldn't stand being in a wagon. It is said that after leaving the Yosogi clan, he joined a caravan of his brethren, the one Lewis dreamed of in the land of the dwarves. The caravan serves as a mobile mission for dwarves throughout Rudolia, a haven of safety where they can turn for advice or assistance. The girl asked him about a good old song. Maybe it would put him in a good mood. The other girl replied that the only thing better than a song in a situation like this was drawing, and suggested he sketch on the rooftop, which had a great view. The elf laughed and told them to stop making fun of the gentleman. The caravan was said to be taking him directly east. Of course, he could have traveled there on a ship, since almost every nation has access to the sea. However, he had two compelling reasons for joining the caravan. The first was the opportunity to use them to send letters to Vin, who was currently traveling through the western part of the country. The second was that he was feeling very lonely on his own. He thought he wasn't looking for comfort or expecting anyone to distract him with conversation. He was content simply to hear someone's voice nearby. He thought this bright, noisy caravan was the perfect place for him right now, but he began to feel nauseous and asked to stop. He asked in surprise that Perosia no longer existed. They told him they were now called Giatica. They explained that they wanted access to the sea and therefore decided to unite with them, but ultimately fell apart and are now part of Valesterica. Eisa recalled visiting the outskirts of Parogia and thinking how poor the country was. Back then, they were lucky to even get a cup of clean water. The girl said that with outside support, they began to prosper and reminded him of the village where he built a well. She said it was worth taking this pond, for example. Water fairies lived there, and over time the locals managed to establish contact with them. In gratitude, they filled it with water and, fed by the moisture, a forest grew around it. She asked him if he had already decided which route he would take east. He replied that he would first cross the border of the United Kingdoms by ship, then stop in Bardus or Odin to learn more about the Swamp Empire, and then head there. The girl asked if he intended to pass through the Swamp Empire. He confirmed that he did. She said she had heard a lot about it, and they said it had been inhabited by lizardmen since ancient times. Irena asked if he'd follow the Empire straight to the Great Plains. She'd heard halflings lived there. Another girl added that he shouldn't forget about the nomads. He'd thought he'd like to see the lizardmen. She asked Eisa to take a look. She explained that Zanes had long since ceased to exist. They had united with Gidel into a single state, thus forming a country called Zevesden. He wondered why he hadn't heard about this. The elf said they would now tell a story about a girl and a water fairy. Long ago, in a distant and very poor country, there was a village in which lived a girl named Marie. Every day she came to the dried-up river and prayed, asking the merciful gods to give them a drink. And suddenly, a miracle happened. A small figure emerged from the ground. It was a water fairy. The fairy took pity on the girl and shared her water with her. But the girl didn't know that the village chief was watching her from behind a tree. He thought that since the water fairy liked Marie so much, he should bring the poor girl to her as a gift, and perhaps the fairy would fill the river with water in gratitude. It is reported that, in the name of the village, the villagers decided to bury it at the bottom of this river, and at that moment, a mysterious shadow appeared before them. It was a wandering elf. Having learned what the villagers wanted to do, the elf became angry and said that your fairy didn't need this, and if they dealt with this girl, They would be doomed to eternal suffering. Suddenly, Marie stood up for her fellow villagers. She said she simply wanted to help her village and asked for advice and teachings on how to do so. And then the elf shared with her some wisdom about how to befriend a fairy. Marie then passed this knowledge on to everyone else, and together they were able to transform the parched land into a beautiful, fertile place, and everyone was saved. And they all lived happily ever after. It's said that the true story of the forgotten Perogia thus became a legend, and the text for the story was written by Hewells. Some believe it's a story about friendship, conscientiousness, and good deeds. And that sometimes it's better not to anger the elves, for who knows what the consequences will be. It is reported that if people were to become more deeply imbued with the wisdom of elves and fairies, then our nations would be able to understand each other much better than they do now. At the tavern, he asked for 2 helpings of soup. The girl said he wasn't obligated to do so, but he replied that everything was fine and asked her to relax. And he said that, after all, he was the only one who had been freed from guarding the cart. Zelta approached them on the street. Eisa asked if it was food, and the girl said it smelled delicious. Someone said it was a clean day, and they hadn't seen anyone suspicious, but they still shouldn't let their guard down. They were eating, and the girl said that dwarven weapons and elven fruits were popular among the people, so they had no reason to worry yet. The girl enthusiastically praised Mr. Eisa, saying the paper theater was his idea and that it was really cool. The young man thought he wouldn't explain to her that he'd seen something similar in a past life. She admitted it was great, but she herself, for one, still didn't know what to do with herself. Someone suggested that perhaps that was why she decided to join their caravan. He reassured her, telling her not to worry, as she still had plenty of time. He advised her to first gain experience and knowledge, and then see what happened. Then he asked if she had any hobbies. Eisa suggested that if she had any hobbies, she should try to explore them. He also advised her, as she realized it was her thing, to continue pursuing her passions and gaining experience, adding that he had once done just that. He offered to teach her the art of paper theater. The girl agreed, noting that bringing joy to children was a lot of fun, and that's what she wanted. Irena asked if he could truly continue on his own. The elf thought that tonight would be his last night here and that he would then leave the caravan. And he decided that she probably meant whether he would be lonely on the road and said that traveling with a caravan was very exciting. He said he wanted to move forward and assured her he would be fine and had no plans to give up. He noted in his mind that 10 years had passed since Martina and Caius's funeral. She asked if he'd like to go with him. She declined, thanking him for the offer, but deciding to stay behind because she wanted to see the world with the caravan. She also added, who would then deliver the letters to Vin? The protagonist thought that if he had said that it would be hard for him to be alone, she would certainly have agreed to go with him. However, he didn't want her to be with him simply to ease his personal grief, and he didn't want to take advantage of her. And in his mind, he called her truly wonderful. Irena asked if she could ask him for something personal. She also asked that if he happened to find the White Lake in his travels, he should take her there. It is reported that White Lake was the name of the adventure team the girl belonged to. It's said that this is also the name of a mythical lake about which the elven people create legends. It's a snow-white lake, endless and boundless, stretching above the clouds. She always imagined giants living there. Eisa thought that no one knew how to get there and said that he did not plan to go anywhere except the east, but promised to try to find it. The girl thanked him with a broad smile. The protagonist thought that since she had asked him to do so, he would do everything possible to make her dream come true. It was reported that this was the city of Bardis. A woman on the street offered to have fun for just 3 pieces of silver, or 5 if they stayed overnight. The woman persistently offered to spend time together, complimenting his face. The woman insistently offered to spend time together, complimenting his face. Eisa thought there were many seekers here. It was reported that Bardis and Ortanen, neighboring countries connected by a river, were currently battling cannibals in the swamps. She continued to persuade him to stay the night. The elf thought she was joking, since her son was older than him. It was said that these countries were not part of the United Kingdom. They were receiving food aid because they were holding off monster attacks. The atmosphere of this town reminded him of Wistakort, as you can meet searchers everywhere. He noted that the hotels here were expensive, but at least they were safe. And he realized that on that first day, Irena, without even looking, had paid for him to stay in one of the most expensive hotels. He mused that an elf on the streets back then might have attracted a lot of unwanted attention, though he still stood out. Still, he needed to prepare for his journey to the Swamp Empire. So he decided to start by gathering information. But first, he needed to eat. The inn served imported wheat and river fish, but it was too expensive. However, a nearby pub had local monster meat on the menu specifically for the seekers. The protagonist thought he didn't know how edible the food was, and the journey to the Swamp Empire was long. He told the butterfly they would notify him if the food was bad. But that was the extent of their authority. I figured the Swamp Empire was a place where people disappeared without a trace. And I figured that with so many swamps, it must stink terribly. So I decided to do some proper reconnaissance before heading there. Eisa decided that if he wanted to continue his journey safely, he needed to learn about spices. Specifically, which ones to use to mask the terrible swampy smell of meat. And he noted to himself how wonderful it was here. It was reported that this was the Swamp Empire, the land of cannibals. The hero admired the vastness and thanked the fairies for always supporting him and not abandoning him even in the swamps. He said he'd try to build them something more decent at their next campsite, so they could relax a bit too. He added that he had high hopes for them tonight. He also asked how much longer it would take them to reach the capital of the Swamp Empire. He hoped there wouldn't be any problems with food. The young man decided that, as far as he knew, there was no poison or parasites in the crocodile's tail, so he would roast it with salt for dinner. The elf thought he hadn't managed to learn any useful information in Bardis. However, the swamps proved to be a safe place. The raft he had built proved safer than the previous one. So while he was resting, the frightened fairies, scattered by the noise of the battle, returned. And he thought that thanks to their help, as well as the knowledge and experience in swordsmanship gained during his travels, the rest of the journey was relatively calm. It is reported that along the way he encountered many unseen creatures. But overall, there were no incidents and he was heading east. Eisa felt someone watching him, but it didn't seem like it was going to attack. He wondered if it was afraid or just curious. And he asked the guys to help him, and they said that something humanoid was hiding in those bushes. He suggested that perhaps it was one of those lizardmen that were the subject of so many rumors. The protagonist decided that if he tried to get closer, he might misunderstand him, and he couldn't stand that. But he was convinced they existed, and that was already a good thing. And he thought that perhaps someday he would have the chance to get to know them better. The elf reflected that he would soon be crossing a vast plain. He wondered what he would do with the remaining food then, whether to throw it away. Hugh had warned him after all. Legends are said to have been told of the bravery and courage of the local nomads. Ironically, most of the thieves and lawless people of Darat came from here. They were born on the plains, but for some reason were exiled from the tribe. The young man thought he'd heard that some nomads traded with foreign countries, and he hoped he'd come across just such a tribe. In the worst case, he'd have to find his way across the sea. The Great Plain is reportedly inhabited by halflings Eisa. Everyone has known this for a long time. They're a tribal people, about half the height of an average human. And he thought he'd love to meet them. Ace saw a herd of wild horses and wondered if one of them was a mutant. And he admired the vastness around him. He also thought that horses had very charming body structures, and perhaps one of them would let him ride for a bit, if only he could remember how. He remembered sitting behind Irina while she steered the reins and thought it had been a good time. He also remembered that horses had even shorter lifespans than people, and she had probably already left this world. The protagonist reflected that over the course of his long life, he had experienced many encounters and just as many farewells. And even if there had been not just one such horse among them, but a whole herd, he would still only remember. The elf asked if anyone needed his help. He also asked if she was a young fairy who hadn't yet fully learned to use her powers. It said that fairies have little understanding of how their powers work outside of interaction with natural phenomena. When he asks them for something, they grant it, but they also try to restructure it so that it can be realized within the bounds of possibility. And he thought that these arguments didn't apply to the water fairy he'd met many years ago. She'd been in this world longer and had plenty of experience. There was no point in comparing her to the others. That fairy tale said that fairies were born before elves. Eisa thought the wind fairies were freedom-loving and curious. Their wings could carry them to any corner of this vast world. But how persistent they were. He asked who was attacking them. He reflected that he was closer to the fire and water fairies. Fire and water were part of humans, and they owed their lives to them, expressing this through religious rituals. Elves, like him and Vin, differed from humans only in that they could directly communicate with the fairies. Archers appeared. He thought he didn't know what was going on here, and whether he should get involved. But it seemed he'd hit something again. The man on horseback ordered the survivors to take care of the wounded and retreat. The protagonist thought he only did it because he didn't want any more casualties. However, it seems half of their fighters are seriously wounded, and he thought he must have caught them off guard, thinking they were smarter than he thought since they retreated almost immediately. He also thought the local settlers must have displeased them in some way since they had decided to attack. People thanked him, and he thought that now he was definitely in the right place. Eisa thought, so this is where the nomads live. The woman apologized for keeping him waiting so long. She expressed to him the heartfelt gratitude of their entire settlement for his brave deed, calling him a good messenger. And she introduced herself as Siren, a shaman whose gift is to speak with the wind. That's why they call her Child of the Wind. He thought that meant this girl could see fairies. He wondered if the fairies had really taken a liking to her enough to show themselves to her, even though her life was so different from that of ordinary people. Her life was like the free wind, and perhaps that was why. The protagonist introduced himself and said that in his native land he was nicknamed the Maple Child. He added that he didn't know what they meant by messenger of the wind, but could only say that the wind fairy had asked him to help them, and he was simply passing by. The girl asked him for a favor. She begged him to protect their people from the Dahlia tribe. The elf thought it was rather low to place such a responsibility on the shoulders of a fragile girl who was still just a child. It was as if she were trapped and not allowed to break free. He decided he would simply help them and leave, though he didn't think it would end there. The Barum and Dahlia are said to be nomadic tribes of the Great Plain, ancient wind worshippers. Once upon a time, these two peoples lived in peace. It all ended the moment they were born. The child of fire and the child of the wind. One was given the gift of controlling fire. Taking command of the tribe, Dahlia used this power to besiege the southern lands. This caused the Barum tribe to suffer, and they refused to deal with him. However, the southern lands managed to fight back, but the damage was irreparable. It is said that the tribes tried to reach an agreement among themselves. But the child of fire is an ordinary person, albeit gifted beyond all others. One day he will leave this world. And when that happens, they will have nothing left. No lands, no allies. They should come to their senses before it's too late. A representative of the Dahlia tribe said that these children were their new gods, their future. He offered to give the child of the wind as a wife to their ruler, and then the glory of their tribes would shine forth once again. Barum tribe elder, being the girl's father, refused without hesitation. He asked how they dared insult their faith, since their people would always be faithful to the wind. That meeting ended in a fight, in which Serena's father and the Dahlia tribesmen defeated each other. So the tribe was left leaderless. Now, mostly women, old men, and a growing generation of young fighters live here. She assumed that today's attack was planned to eliminate all women and female children. Eisa thought he seemed to have arrived just in time and was offered a treat. Serena's younger brother, Shuro, introduced him to a drink made from sour horse milk and mutton balls. Serena's mother asked if the messenger of the winds would like it. The elf wondered if it was Aaron and thanked him, saying it was very tasty, though not to everyone's taste. Be that as it may, he thought he'd managed to get a handle on the situation, all thanks to the help of his faithful fairies. Without them, he wouldn't have understood even half of this story, the language barrier being what it was. And he decided that to successfully complete his mission, he needed two things. He decided he needed to deal with the fire boy first. After all, he wasn't some kind of god. And the power of fire was fairly predictable, so it was entirely feasible. And he wanted to teach Siren the art of communicating with the fairies so the tribe could use their power for self-defense. However, he didn't know if she would want such power, or if the tribe's people would use it for their own ends. Eisa thought that if this suddenly happened, nothing would remain of the tribe at this rate. And he didn't want that. The main character decided that in any case, he had no choice. He promised to help the fairy, so he would help. The elf remembered that this wasn't exactly what the fairy had actually asked of him. She had asked him to help Serena, and he thought that saving an entire tribe didn't seem to be part of her plans. The fairy asked him to take the girl away from these lands, teach her how to communicate with the fairies to harness their powers, and then let her go. He thought the aftertaste of these balls was simply disgusting, but he couldn't spit them out. And he decided that no matter, just a little more, and the carefree wind of freedom would return to the Great Plain. Eisa was indignant at the impossibility of defeating the Child of Fire. He added that they hadn't even tried. He said he had dealt with them alone the last time and there had been no casualties. And he said that if they didn't like his proposal so much, maybe they had better ideas. He thought he knew it. The protagonist decided he couldn't stand people who thought they were right just because they were old. He's actually the oldest one here, reportedly a high elf, 209 years old. Serena said that it was hard for her to put all this on him. But let it be as he says, and added that everyone is counting on him. The elf thought, wow, the girl's only 10 and she's already caught up in a military conflict. And she's not even afraid. Perhaps she's driven by a desire to avenge her father. And she's so worried, but she doesn't yet know what fairies are capable of. And he mused that perhaps it was because her gift only allowed her to hear wind fairies. In any case, the connection between them was quite strong, and he added that he didn't like all these mathematical calculations. Rough calculations show that a single ordinary elf can only harness 10% of a fairy's total power. Arena, for example, can harness as much as 3 units. If he manages to properly train Serena, she could very well reach the elf's level within a few years. He thought that at her current level, Arena could easily deal with several dozen well-trained knights. I think Serena would be capable of something similar too. Shuro called out to the messenger of the winds. The boy asked Eisa to protect his little sister. He explained that he would like to protect her himself in their father's place, but he was too young to fight, and he begged him to do it for him. The elf thought he was just a child, but he was already acting like an adult. He thought that looking at this boy, he couldn't help but be reminded of Vin at his age. And he told him not to worry because he would do everything to protect his family. He also realized that he now had another reason to go into battle. Eisa decided that he would have to face them alone, and if he was destined to lose this fight, then so be it. The protagonist thought it wasn't an army, but just a bunch of idiots. Or maybe wild animals, even though they were just as strong as him. The young man thought that then the White Lake team would finally be able to get back together in full force. Irena had sent fairies to him that day, and Martina had helped her. Or if he had entered into battle with Cleus, then he probably would no longer exist. But things turned out differently, and now it's strange for him to think of his old friends like that. He also decided not to touch the horses. He reportedly created the explosion without using any spells, without even lifting a finger. He reminds Martin of something, just as he suspected, said to be a pyrokinetic. The elf ordered the fire fairies to come to him and take action. He asked if he was giving up, adding that it looked like he had won. The people thanked him. Eisa thought that possessing pyrokinesis was actually quite a feat, and that the Dahlia tribe was lucky to have such a talent. And he asked his name. Someone in the crowd asked why he hadn't been defeated yet. Another said they would rid them not only of the Dahlia tribe, but also of their leader. The protagonist replied that if they wanted to defeat him, then let them do it themselves. He had kept his promise, and the enemy was neutralized, and he no longer had any reason to stay here. Eisa asked whether they wanted their tribesmen to come and avenge him, or to defeat the Child of the Wind in retaliation. He added that it was up to them to decide the outcome. The people thanked him for the fact that from now on, a carefree wind would blow across the Great Plain again. The girl asked him to always follow his heart. She said that if he needed anything, he could contact them at any time, and they would be happy to help. She also added that the Barum tribe would never forget what he had done for them. The young man thought that this was what he understood. A child of the wind, and she really was worth taking into account. He thought that no adult could have handled this role better than her, and he even felt embarrassed that he had not taken her seriously. And he thought that he would never know what was really hidden behind this mask. Eisa asked if he also wanted to learn how to communicate with spirits in order to fight, to which his sister said that this was no joke. He agreed and said they would start tomorrow. The boy thanked him. The protagonist announced that from today on, he would be training them. He said he would teach Sullen how to communicate with spirits and Shuro how to wield a sword. He added that he would also teach Jewel to fight without relying on his special abilities. Jewel was surprised and asked why he needed to teach him since they were enemies. The elf said that in the end, he wasn't his enemy. He explained that his pyrokinesis wasn't weak, but he himself was too weak. It was said that pyrokinesis was his only ability. If he knew how to counter it, he would be rendered helpless. But more importantly, he was just a child. He thought, what a waste of talent since he couldn't grow up under such restrictions. And he thought that he didn't want to be turned into a simple puppet and wanted to live as he wanted. In any case, he said he would definitely teach him fencing and offer to teach Selen. The girl asked if she could, since she was a woman. The young man assured her that of course he could, since he himself had learned fencing from a woman who was very strong. And he added that she was a wonderful person. Eisa decided to start by making them practice swords, saying he had the tools. He'd help them. He figured they'd been relying on their innate talents their whole lives, so he wanted to teach them something new, something they weren't familiar with. And he decided that, as his masters had taught him, he wanted to give them strength so that they could find a better future. The protagonist says he was with the Barum tribe for some time. Snow covered the Great Plains, so the tribe moved south. He accompanied the tribe's trade caravans to the southern state of Vivenal Balt. At the market, the merchant was surprised to meet a forest dweller in these parts. He explained that he wanted to make swords for the children and needed iron and coal. The merchant said that the people behind him didn't finish the sentence. The elf said that he had made some friends in a Barum tribe, and they were good people. The man laughed, realizing they were the forest dwellers' friends. It was reported that traders in the south were now very wary of the nomads. But Barumu was very concerned about trade and was here as a middleman. The merchant advised them to avoid the Dahlia tribe as they were barbarians. Eisa thanked him for the advice. The young man says that Jewel almost always goes with him because he is the only one who can control him. The protagonist said that he understands why the old people are afraid of him, but he doesn't think that he will ever start acting up. He taught them for a short time. Shuro, being too young, was the most problematic. But Jewel always lent him a helping hand. It is reported that although he is not much older than Selen, he is still the oldest. The elf believes that in this way they gradually grew closer. However, the fact that his mere existence led to the end of their father's life didn't quite cut it. He added that this makes the boy nervous. He doesn't understand what they are thanking him for. It said that looking back at his tribe's history and hearing what others thought of him changed him greatly. He'd spent his entire life causing problems for others, never considering his own feelings. And when he thought about this, he became sad. And I thought that he didn't want this to be the end for him, so he would keep a close eye on him. Jewel's situation began to change little by little. He did a lot for Barum, herded cattle, unloaded things, and helped me and the others. It's said that it's difficult to hate those who work for their own good. All his actions have managed to change the tribesmen's attitude toward him. They no longer avoid him and even begin to greet him. But even so, his own experiences began to upset him even more. The young man said he needed to use his imagination to convey images to the spirits. And he realized that even now he didn't fully understand Selen. He noticed that she only showed emotion outside the tribe's sight. He jokingly asked if that wasn't how people threw out trash. The protagonist asked if she wanted to gain power to avenge her father or to protect Barum. Eisa wondered if she wanted the power to break free from her cage. Or both. He just hoped that this power wouldn't make her sad, and that everything he did was for her happiness. The boy joyfully shouted that he had defeated Jewel-Suith. The elf thought that Shiro, however, did not possess any special powers, unlike the other two. But he was not discouraged and tirelessly pursued his goal. And he thought that it was always nice to watch such a diligent child and praised him, saying that he was a good boy and that he didn't even have a scratch on him. It's said that 3 years have passed since his arrival in Barum. They lost several people along the way, the last of the old men. Thinking about this, the grumbling stopped, but it allowed him and Jewel to become closer. They were the ones who never stopped scolding him. Jewel said he was his master and he wanted to wash away the humiliation he'd inflicted on him 3 years ago. And the only way was to challenge him to a duel. The young man thought he still didn't know his own weaknesses. He said he'd grown up, was a man now, and deserved a serious fight. The boy asked if he would fight with it. The elf explained that it was a knife made from the fang of a great wolf, easy to handle, and he liked it. And he asked if that was all he could do. He said he thought he could beat him with the same move over and over again. The protagonist stated that he couldn't hit him, and that he needed to practice more. This would be his next task. Jewel desperately asked why he didn't just do it, and Ace called him a stupid student. The elf explained that if an apprentice makes a mistake, it's the master's duty to guide them. And if they regret their actions, it's the master's duty to forgive them. And I thought that this is what a master should do. The young man said he was settling matters with Barum, and asked if it was time for him to return to Dahlia. He said he'd been meaning to take him to Dahlia soon anyway. He added that he was such an impatient child and asked if there were so many things he really wanted to do right now. The guy said that if he wanted to leave, he would need a horse. The girl blessed him, wishing him a fair wind. The protagonist at the moment did not know whether he would be able to live his life the way he wanted. But he prayed to the winds that blew across these great plains, hoping that it would happen. Jewel was reported to have passed away 2 years ago, and at 15, Xelen came of age. Her communication with spirits was comparable to Irene's, and her swordsmanship was quite passable. She had become so strong in those 5 years. The elf still had no idea what she wanted, what she was thinking, or what she was afraid of. Eisa thinks that perhaps she had the freedom she desired all along. She alone knew what she wanted, even though her life was incredibly difficult and could seem unbearable and cruel. He thought that perhaps this duty had never bound her. She would continue to lead the Barum tribe, believing that this was what she herself desired. It's said that over the past 2 years, Dahlia and Barum have resumed trade. Jewel, in turn, has become the leader of the Dahlia tribe, and Shiro has become a true expert in fencing. And he thought, how fast are children growing? The young man decided there was nothing keeping him there anymore. He'd done everything he wanted. The girl asked if they would see each other again. The protagonist said they were already grown up, and if they had any problems, they should seek out Yosogi's dojo in the Dria, and he was sure they would be helped there. And if fate brought them together, they would meet again. He never knew how much time he would be able to spend with them, or whether he would be able to live up to their expectations. Whatever people wanted from him, the elf believes that he will no longer make thoughtless promises. As he did in the past, he will simply leave and continue on his way, and leave here not empty-handed, but with a whole baggage of stories. And he couldn't wait to hear Keihi tell him about his 3 little students. He also learned to ride a horse and decided that he needed to tell her about that too. Eisa said he'd received 2 pieces of advice for when he left the plains and crossed the hills. First, he should dismount when greeting halflings. The girl urged him to be careful. The boy said that as long as he respected them and their values, they were kind and nice people. Secondly, there was a race that wasn't so friendly, the fairies. The elf believes fairies are among those who desire eternal life. He's heard that all fairies are linked by a hive mind. They are timid and cautious, but driven by incredible malice, and that anyone who approaches such a circle will be kidnapped and subjected to study. However, the fairies raise the captured children for their own protection. The protagonist said he'd gotten this horse Saya in Barum. He decided not to worry too much and quickened his pace, heading east. Looking at the map, he determined that the journey to the Golden Empire would take about 6 months. These 5 territories make up the Golden Empire, and I thought that 6 months is actually quite close. 6 months later, he arrived in the city of White Hill by the White River. He noted that the buildings were very reminiscent of Keihi's dojo, and since entering the country he had experienced many surprises. He said he initially had to bribe his way in, and it's nothing like Ludria. If you don't have the right currency, you have to be prepared to be fleeced. It's 5 times the usual price. And the money he exchanged had a big hole in it. Eisa thought so many annoying things had happened. He found a place to stay, and then the next thing on his list was a tavern to get some information. The elf decided that his ultimate goal had not changed, but if he wanted to enjoy his journey through these lands, he needed to learn more about what was happening here. The protagonist believes that Yosugi Ryo originates in the Far East, on an island nation in the sea. And instead of traveling there, he'll need to gather more information about the place. He reminds himself to always remember to research beforehand. At the tavern, he was greeted and asked what he wanted. He thought there was so much to choose from. When the girl asked what she would like, she replied that her favorite was apricot wine. The young man ordered 2 glasses of apricot wine and something tasty to go with it. He asked her to tell him all about the White River as he had just arrived. He figured if he'd learned anything, it was that if someone wasn't ashamed to take everything they could from him, he'd be equally shameless and squeeze everything he could from them. It was the fastest way to a mutually beneficial exchange, and he decided that people here seemed inclined to interact in precisely this manner. She said her name was Sue and asked if he was a forest dweller. He introduced himself as well. She explained that elves and forest dwellers were a rare sight for those like them who couldn't enter the Golden Prefecture. The village elders would be glad to see him. He wondered if the emperor was an elf. Sue explained that the ruler of the Golden Empire is the jade dragon Di-Jun. They call him the Hermit, the one who never ages. She warned them to be careful, as doubting his existence is a crime. Eisa thought of the emperor as a hermit, striving to become one with nature. And he remembered Li Hong of Folon, who seemed to have called him a forest dweller. The elf wondered if he could have come from these parts. The girl brought him some boiled chicken. He thought Sue would teach him many different things. It's said that the Golden Prefecture as such has no adventurers. Monsters are defeated by soldiers and self-defense units. However, there are also wandering knights, Yuxia, as they're called. The protagonist asked if they were strong. The girl replied that warriors were strong and brave, but even common thugs were strong. He asked what made them so special. She explained that they respect human virtue. They instill fear in the strong and save the weak. They do what's right, even if it means breaking the law. Anyone who fails to live up to this is simply a fraud. And she pointed to the man, saying that he was a real Yuxia. The young man thought he looked polite, but he must be quite strong. Sue said he was an earthly man, and she explained that the earthlings are the people who live in the north of the empire. Their skin is covered in ores and precious stones. They are, of course, strong and robust, and their appetites match. The girl added that they have a funny class system. Commoners have stones, soldiers have metals, and nobles have precious stones. But at first glance, you can't really tell them apart. She warned him to be careful around the riverbanks as they were dangerous. There were many disputes over who had rights to use them, with the port and merchant guilds both wanting to take everything for themselves. The elf thought these places couldn't be more different, and yet East and West argue about the same thing. The girl told him there was nothing to laugh about. A few days later, the girl said she'd heard everything and that he'd saved a child near the shore, calling him a role model. He figured rumors would spread quickly. The protagonist explained that he took Saya on a casual, leisurely stroll through Whitetail, but things suddenly went wrong when he crossed a bridge and stumbled right into a dispute between guilds. The child, too slow to escape, was reportedly about to be pushed away. The young man said he intervened in the argument and took the child to safety. People were outraged that he would just up and run away without apologizing. He warned them that if they wanted a fight, he could always deal with them, and then left. And the child was returned home and thanked him. He said he did it for fun, nothing noble or chivalrous. And he decided that if rumors had already reached Sue, the guy he shot must be really pissed. And I thought that such people don't take damage to their reputation lightly, and I bet they'll try to get revenge. Perhaps I should change the departure date. The elf looked at the map, noting that this country was vast and he could gather information from anywhere. The White River itself had 5 major cities. He thought it would be a shame to say goodbye to this cozy tavern. 2 men approached him and asked if he was the forest archer. They heard he had a small quarrel with Holban. One of them rudely ordered the woman to bring drinks and that they were interested in his services. The protagonist assumed Ho Bang was another name for the port guild and assumed these guys were from the trade guild. Someone said he thought he was the smartest. The man offered to take him into their ranks as an archer in exchange for valuable gold bars. The young man asked if they heard his laughter and said they were too stupid to understand his answer. One of them angrily asked if he was looking for a fight. Suddenly Jizo appeared and said that this was their visitor and he had to ask them to leave. Eisa thanked him for helping him out. He replied that it was obvious he didn't need much help. He added that there would be chaos here if he had to use force, and that he was simply doing his job. The elf thought he would gladly duel him. Jizo wished him bon appetit and left. The young man thought the obsidian scales covering his body meant his fists would simply slip. He felt this strong passion in the boy, just like when he encountered his past masters, and so he wanted to test him. The protagonist is unhappy that Jizo is dealing with his problems for him and decides to stay longer before leaving and see how things are here. Eisa thought he had brought this on himself.